I want to welcome everybody to the fourth annual Parsons Field Institute Symposium. We do this virtually every year, and it's a great way to bring in the entire community that surrounds the Parsons Field Institute, update everybody, celebrate our accomplishments, do kind of a deep dive into some of the topics that have been really pertinent during that year, and also give everyone a look at the year ahead. So glad you all are here. All right, a couple of little housekeeping things. Please mute yourself during the presentations. This helps so that we don't have like dogs barking in the background or doorbells ringing, that sort of thing. Presentations in each section are going to be followed by a Q&A. And what I mean by section is if you look at the agenda, some of the presentations are collected under one topic. So we might have 2 or 3 presentations and then kind of a Q&A section for all of them. And we did that for the sake of efficiency. Please feel free to write down your questions as a presentation is going, or put them right in the chat, and that'll help our moderator collect the questions and then share them when we get to that Q&A section. Let's see. So stick around for a prize after the break. I'm not going to tell you what it is. You got to stick around and find out, but it's a pretty cool thing that we launched this year. And all presentations are going to be recorded and made available. So if you have to leave at any point and you're missing that one presentation that you were really hoping to get, that's okay. It'll be sent out afterwards as a YouTube link. So with that, a real quick review of the goal of the Parsons Field Institute. We conduct ecological research through partnerships and citizen science to inform long-term natural resource management of the Sonoran Desert, to contribute to the broader scientific knowledge, and to inspire stewardship of the desert. And you're going to see all of those things today. Real quick look at our agenda. After me, you'll hear from Doug Jensen, the Citizen Science Chair, on the unique role of citizen science in our organization. And then we'll be jumping right into heat and fire with some presentations about the flora and fauna and fire in the Sonoran Desert. We'll do a 5-minute break and then the door prize. So you got to come back for it. And then we're going to go into restoring for a hotter and drier future, because a lot of what we are going to be doing in the coming year centers around restoration. Last, we have a panel of stewards that work in or have leadership positions in the various programs, the various conservancy programs, and they're going to be talking about what they do to help deal with extreme heat and fire in the context of the preserve. So really looking forward to that. And then we're going to end with a look at the road ahead. So I always like to start with the big why, because that kind of sets everything in context. So people know, like, okay, why are we asking these particular questions, or why are we doing things, the way that we are? And also kind of gives us a little bit of historical context. Some of the big questions that we have dealt with over the last 10 plus years of the Parsons Field Institute are what lives in the preserve. Those were the first questions that we addressed, just lists of flora and fauna, who's here. Then we wanted to know what's the baseline, like what can we expect, or what are we maybe managing to? And then what are the threats to the preserved flora and fauna, or even geology at times, or just the ecological integrity of the preserve? We definitely need to know that. And then from there, the ecological monitoring that we do helps give us a sense of the trends. Are sensitive species decreasing? Is that something we need to pay attention to? Are invasive species increasing? Those kind of trends tell us, what we might need to recommend. what we might need to work with our partners to accomplish to make sure that the preserve stays healthy. And that leads us to what can we do about it? Whoops. So you might have seen this last year. Jessie put together a really nice kind of flow of, how the adaptive management works in this context, why these questions are important, and where our projects kind of fit in this context. So if you remember, our monitoring projects, like the bat monitoring, the bird monitoring, butterfly monitoring, those all give us information about trends, and we periodically review them, and through getting results, and make decisions about, like, do we need to recommend a management action, or do we need to gather more information, or do we need to keep monitoring, etc. And each one of our projects is in a slightly different area on this chart. So as we're going through them, just keep this in mind in terms of, like, some of our projects are very experimental. Some of them are, we do the same thing every year and get information until we notice a weird trend, and then we go in and investigate. So that's sort of how the model works. Really, really brief history of the Parsons Field Institute in citizen science. And this is for some of the folks that we've invited to this symposium who may not be as familiar. The Parsons Field Institute is, well, actually about 14 years old, 13, 14 years, depending on the point you start with. But the idea of it started back in 2005 when the preserve was being built out very rapidly, and people started asking questions like, hey, what happens when we get, when the city's able to purchase all of the land that that we want, or a huge amount of it? How do we take care of it long term? And that was sort of, focused on like an ecotourism/science model. But in 2010, we were able to get a grant from the Pulliam Foundation to really launch the Field Institute as a science and citizen science model. I could talk forever about this, but I'm going to go through it really briefly. In 2013, we launched our citizen science program. We'd been kind of a loose collection of, staff and volunteers and research PIs or research partners. And in 2013, we really put that all together, and the citizen science program was born. In 2014, we came out with the flora and fauna survey that kind of solidified, this is what we have in the preserve. And then in 2015, we worked with the city of Scottsdale and other partners to develop the ecological resource plan, which is similar to a management plan, not quite, but very similar to that. In 2018, the Bob and Renee Parsons Foundation joined, and the Field Institute became the Parsons Field Institute. And then in 2020, we continued to do a lot of work despite COVID, because we do a lot of our work outside. So that was great, but we also put some new tools in our tool belt, such as Zoom symposia. In 2023, we launched our first complete hybrid science and education project through our living labs, and you're going to hear a lot about that today. So you can see, the trajectory of growth and intricacy of the Field Institute. And I think the biggest takeaway for me is that it would not be possible without our citizen scientists. As you're going to hear from Doug, that is a really unique aspect of us, of what we do, and this just would not be possible without them. All right, so I'm showing you some of our foundational accomplishments, and also being mindful of the time. These are some of the papers that we came out with, or plans that we came out with early on, that really set the stage for what we do. And especially the ecological resource plan, that really set aside, like, okay, these are our sensitive species: tortoises, Townsend's big ear bat. These are the things, these are the threats, these are the things we really have to keep an eye on: invasive species, fire, things like that. So we're standing on a really good foundation of research and understanding of this place. Over the course of this year, and I have a feeling I am probably not going to get to everything, but we've really made advancements in a number of key areas. And I'm just going to go through them real fast. So our wildlife camera project launched a spring deployment of 60 cameras. This is probably one of the biggest camera projects in the state, maybe more, but it's very impressive, and we got that off the ground this year. We fully identified the photos from our fall deployment of 30 cameras. So we do 30 in the fall, 60 in the spring, and those have been identified by about 45 experienced volunteers. That's quite the army. We have the first descriptive analysis of the fall camera data and collected sound profiles from 30 of the fall cameras, or the 30 fall cameras. Over on the left, you see some of our preliminary results. That is a species diversity map, and the larger dots mean they indicate greater diversity. So we're starting to see, what's going on in the preserve with our species diversity. With the tortoise telemetry, we completed 3 years of data collection, presented preliminary results to the Arizona Game and Fish Department, secured support for continuing the survey, worked with partners to create educational signage, and worked with the news media to educate the public. So a lot of wonderful activity, a couple of tragedies, but those with a couple of tortoises that died, but we were able to really kind of springboard that to more public education. Invasive species, these numbers blew me away when I first saw them, because we have got our maps to a point where now we were able to run a full analysis on what we've accomplished. Since 2017, our invasive species team have mapped 22,978 acres of the preserve. And that's, for the most part, on foot with a pair of binoculars. That's impressive. We've got a little over 30,000 acres to work with, so that's a large amount. They identified 3,497 acres of fountain grass and buffalo grass, our two key species. So that's about 15% of the land surveyed. They've removed 2,739 acres. That's a lot. That is a lot. And that's 78% of the known population. And my takeaway is just hope. I think that we have a lot to look forward to in terms of actually getting these two species under control. Continued to work with the city of Scottsdale to expand the joint invasive species plan to include stinknet. And we're continuing our work with Intel to test a scale up of the AI software. And we're hoping that our work together will result in a model where they can take photographs, aerial photographs, run them through the AI software and identify fountain grass and buffalo grass. So we can finally get those last 7,000 acres surveyed without working through any more boots. Our arthropods, our longest running survey, got some really interesting results from the first analysis. Here's a poster. I know that you can't read it, but when these become available, you can certainly, zoom in, and we have the poster available as well. This showed no consistent effects just to back up a little bit, we had transects where we look at the arthropods at the edge of the preserve and then in the interior of the preserve. And after, this time of doing that survey, we found that there really weren't consistent differences. So we're not really showing a big edge effect. But when you break it down to seasons and locations, you do see some differences. One of them was in the summer, we see a big increase of invasive fire ants along the wildland-urban interface, or the edge. So that's interesting. This also, the analysis supports the hypothesis that climate is a strong driver of arthropods. So that's something that we, suspected, but it's really good to see confirmed. And more about the arthropods in the last presentation. We also came out with a butterfly paper, and that showed that we have some key declines region-wide in butterfly populations, which are very important to look at. I'm going to skip that one and go straight to what we did this year with restoration. So many of you know that we had the diamond fire that burned about 270 acres of the preserve in the Gooseneck area. And we shifted one of our projects, the Living Labs, which was a kind of high school restoration project, to the burned area in order to shift those resources over, because we were doing a lot of planting. And we also continued working with the students on their experiment at their school. The students actually wrote a paper and got it published in the Cactus and Succulent Journal, Society Journal, which is amazing. There's a copy of the paper right there. We can send all these out to anyone interested afterwards. And we, together with construction and maintenance, and of course the citizen science program and the Living Labs, planted 120 baby saguaros and 28 Palo Verde trees in the burned area. So it's a really good start. And if you're wondering, that is no small feat. But wait, if you were wondering where bats, phenology, birds, and our IUCN project or any others in there, I have to say we had to really whittle it down to the projects to highlight in this beginning section, but I'm going to be talking about all of these in the last section when we go over future directions. So hang in there.
Well, it's a pleasure to be with you. I'm Doug Jensen, the chair of Citizen Science. And as Melanie was indicating, we have a lot of projects, and virtually all of them have an impact regarding heat and fire in the preserve. And before I get into that, however, I would like to contextualize what we do in citizen science. So first of all, who are we? And secondly, how do we undertake our work? And thirdly, what projects do we sustain? Here is a typical definition of citizen science. There are many, many governmental, academic, and nonprofit organizations that are involved with citizen science. The definition from the National Geographic Society says citizen science is the practice of public participation and collaboration in scientific research to increase scientific knowledge. Basically, it's utilizing non-professionally trained individuals to participate in the scientific process. And in the 1990s, this really became a movement, an identified movement recognized by the tag of citizen science, with the growing academic literature and the creation of national organizations to promote it. But here in the Conservancy, we definitely are unique as citizen scientists, and we're also unique in the world of citizen science. So in the Conservancy, we are one of 9 Conservancy programs. 5 of those programs will be represented on the panel toward the end of the symposium that deals with how other programs in the Conservancy are getting involved with heat and fire in the preserve. At this time, during the past year ended April 30, 296 citizen scientists contributed in our program. They contributed a total of over 13,000 hours, which worked out to 46 hours per citizen science, which is quite remarkable because that was the top level of participation in the preserve. Because Actually, there were other programs in the preserve that have more active stewards than we have and that contribute more hours than we do. But we tend year in and year out to lead the Conservancy in average hours per steward contributed. We support the Parsons Field Institute. We're here in this symposium as their guests. They are the entity that houses the professional scientists within the preserve. And so we're unique in the preserve in that in the Conservancy, in that we are the only program that permanently supports another established separate entity in the Conservancy. And that also makes us unique in citizen science. The vast majority of citizen science projects, I'm talking 95% or more, are basically short-term projects where citizens crowdsource data and provide it to some remote researcher. But in this citizen science program, we have an ongoing partnership with professional scientists that goes on as the research is conducted. And the essence of that partnership is sustaining the 9 research projects, many of which Melanie was just discussing. And that is something else that makes us unique in the world of citizen science, because we are part of an intentional program that monitors biodiversity on a long-term basis throughout an entire ecosystem. Looking further at our work and how unique we are, we pursue a model of citizen science that is regarded generally as collaborative, which means citizen scientists are involved in the work from beginning to end. So we help identify the research issue, we help create the approach, the research design, we gather data, we help analyze it, and eventually we're involved in the publication of the results of that work. At this time, 70 of our approximately 300 citizen scientists are certified. That means they have engaged in an extra process of education and participation and passed an exam so that they have a higher level of expertise. And in a collaborative program, it is extremely important to have that extra level of expertise. And we have a great need for leadership in the program. When you look at the program and the project level, and then you get to the fact that almost all of our projects are divided into teams, when you get to the bottom of that hierarchy of leadership, we need about a quarter of our citizen scientists to be involved in leadership at the project, program, and team levels. And so having those 70 certified citizen scientists is very, very valuable to us. And education is extremely valuable to us. And during the past year, we have implemented a new class on leadership in citizen science to help train leaders. And presently, we have under development another class involving research design and statistical analysis and research methods that will be offered in the near future that also will help train citizen scientists. So let's take a look at some of our projects. And first of all, our biodiversity projects, there are 7 of them. They involve long-term monitoring in almost every instance. They use fixed transects. The data goes to a variety of sources, such as the North American Butterfly Association, the Audubon Society, the National Phenology Network, various universities, and a lot of the data, virtually all of it, is retained in-house by the Field Institute for analysis locally. Some of those projects have unique implications for heat. Many of them will require years of continued data gathering in order to have statistically reliable results. But some of our projects already are bearing fruit. And one of those is our tortoise project, which Melanie had mentioned. It's a 4-year grant-funded initiative. It involves approximately 20 tortoises that are telemetered and monitored basically on a monthly basis. It has generated significant external interest. We've had politicians, members of the Conservancy board, students from Arizona State University and Scottsdale Community College, representatives of the Navajo Nation, and participating in these tortoise surveys. We've also had the opportunity to take news of what we're doing to the public through our Mustang Library series and by making a presentation at the Arizona Department of Game and Fish. So that is a project that does have relevant research results that we'll be looking at today. Another project that will be featured today that Melanie mentioned is our ecological restoration project. Past research in that project involved closed roads and trails. Those research projects are wrapped up. There were papers published regarding both of them that in the collaborative model of citizen science also involved citizen sciences participating in that academic work. At the current time, we have ongoing research with BioCrust and with the RestoreNet program. The photo on the right is a picture of setting up our RestoreNet plots about a year and a half ago up in the Northeast Preserve. Basically, RestoreNet is a project sponsored by the United States Geological Survey with over 20 partners, various government entities, nonprofits, and academic institutions where they're exploring a variety of ways to restore desert habitats in the southwest of the United States. The current project that we are very, very involved with is the Diamond Fire Scar that we have begun rehabbing, and this is a classic example of collaborative citizen science in action, where immediately after the fire had subsided, there were citizen scientists working with other scientists to assess the situation and then to develop a restoration plan, and a great deal of work has been done under that plan. You'll be seeing what is going on there later. It has involved very much one of our wonderful science partners, Scottsdale Community College, and also high school students in the Living Lab program. So that's going to be a wonderful and successful project. Another project that we are not featuring directly today, but that is extremely relevant to fire and heat in the preserve, is our invasive plant project. And Melanie had given some of the data regarding that project. We've had two major research projects with buffalo grass and fountain grass. Through those projects, we determined that the most cost-effective way to deal with infestations of those invasives is to apply herbicides. And so within the citizen science program, we have 10 stewards who now have been certified and trained by the state to apply herbicides. The photo on the right is a field of buffalo grass that was treated a couple years ago in the South Preserve. And you can kind of get a feel for the magnitude of that when you look at the white object in the background of the picture, which is one of our herbicide applicators on the other side of the infestation. And of course, the plants are blue because we place a colorant in the herbicide so we can determine which plants we have sprayed. 2 grants have been obtained by the city of Scottsdale from the Arizona Department of Forestry and Fire Management, each in the range of $190,000, that have allowed us to bring in, that has allowed the city to bring in contractors to also work with treating fields of invasive plants. So it's really become a project where we are working collaboratively with these contractors and with the city to treat as many acres as possible. At this time, I'm going to do a little segue to talk about plants that we're most concerned about, because during the panel discussion, these plants will be mentioned. So I wanted those of you who are attending this symposium who may not have a lot of familiarity with them to recognize them. Buffalo grass is one that is very difficult to deal with because it replicates itself not only through airborne seeds, but also through rhizomes underground. So it takes years of repeated herbicide treatments to deal with this particular invasive. You will see it along roadways. It's not really a plant that you find a lot in neighborhoods. Fountain grass is an ornamental that you do find in neighborhoods. You also find it growing along roadways, and it is easier to deal with than buffalo grass because it only replicates itself through airborne seeds. And then finally, the new kid on the block is glowed chamomile. And frankly, this is spreading throughout the valley toward the east, and land use managers are having difficulty coming up with a plan to deal with it. And so that's going to be a future problem that we will deal with in the future. As Melanie indicated, we have treated 2,700 acres of invasive plants within the preserve, and 23,000 acres have been surveyed. Well, the preserve is over 30,000 acres in extent. So what about the remaining 7,000 plus acres? Well, as citizen scientists, we're working with that. We have a very robust program of technical support. And as Melody had mentioned, at this time, we're working on developing drone technology to both survey and perhaps spray invasive plant infestations in the future. We have developed a number of apps that are used by our research projects. So, for example, the Tortoise project, which we'll be hearing from today, uses an app to help manage their data. The restoration people who are working with the Diamond Fire project and the attendant research out there are using an app that we've developed to help manage that data. The invasive plant people use an app that we have developed. And a picture of that app is on this particular slide. It involves colored entries that denote various types of invasive plants, and it allows us to record a lot of information about plants in place where they are found, and then to track our treatments with those plants so we know how often and how effective those treatments are. So those are three of a number of apps that have been developed by the citizen scientists in our program. We have a very active ArcGIS mapping program. During the past year, 8 citizen scientists were trained to create these types of online maps, and they are doing so. We also have massive data management challenges. As Melanie mentioned, our data came in from last fall's deployment of 30 wildlife cameras, and what that resulted in was approximately 600,000 video files and photos that have now been analyzed, and the next data from the current deployment of 60 cameras is coming in, so we'll be dealing with that challenge. So as chair of the Citizen Science Program, I just want to express my thanks to the Parsons Institute and to the Conservancy for the opportunities that we have to participate as citizen scientists. It really is a world-class program, and we are provided opportunities that I think we could obtain nowhere else. And of course, this is tremendously important work as we gather data in order to have an impact on the future management of the preserve. So, Melanie, thank you for this opportunity to participate, and I will pass this back to you.
Thank you, Doug, for everything that you do and all of our citizen scientists. All right. So the next section, we do our deep dive into heat and fire. And these two topics became extremely pertinent this past year as we saw unprecedented heat. We saw things like collapsing saguaros around the Phoenix area. We saw effects on our wildlife and effects on our vegetation as well, although not quite as extreme as in the inner cities. And we also had the first fire in the preserve in about 30 years, the Diamond Fire. So these things have been on our mind. They've shifted some of the things that we've done this year, and some of the things that we will do in the future. So I'm going to introduce Mary Fastiggi. She is our restoration manager here at the Conservancy and the Field Institute. And she is going to talk about fire ecology in the Sonoran Desert and kind of set the stage.
So everyone, it's nice to see you all today. It's been a very successful season, as Doug was mentioning, and we've been very busy. So what I'm going to do in this presentation is set the stage to talk about fire ecology in the Sonoran Desert. And then later on, we'll take a deeper dive into the work that we've been doing. So before we dive into wildfires in the Sonoran Desert and the preserve, I wanted to take a step back and think about a broader role of wildfires in ecosystems in general. So fire is an important component in many ecosystems, and some ecosystems actually depend on periodic fires, and those fires can promote plant and wildlife diversity in those systems. So I have two examples here. The first is for lodgepole pines in the Rocky Mountain areas. There can be pine cones that hang on to the trees for years. And naturally, fires in the system occur every about 80 to 300 years. And when a fire sweeps through, the pine cones have a lot of resin on them. And so that can melt off. And then the seeds are released and they're dispersed into a newly opened canopy. And so that's a system that's developed and has some really good fire adaptation. Another example, closer to where I grew up, is in the Midwest. There's these oak savannas in that area, and there's these beautiful, large bur oak trees that have extremely thick bark. I have a picture of it on the bottom left, and that protects them from fire. And they also have very deep root systems that can resprout after fire. And so fires actually keep the canopy open and prairie species can thrive in there. And so you have large, big trees with prairie species around them. But because of fire suppression, there are very few oak savannas left. So without the fire, the system shifts, and I think in some cases it becomes farmland, in other cases it's become forests. But without that fire there, you don't really have the oak savannas. But what about in our desert, in the Sonoran Desert? There's a natural fire regime to every ecosystem, but it's not very well understood in the Sonoran Desert how fire has interacted with it. There are many clues, though, which point to fires being more rare, low intensity, and not very frequent. So what are some evidence for this? One is that we have very widely spaced plants out there. I think I have a pretty good picture here that doesn't have a lot of invasives in it. And so there wouldn't be a lot of fuel load in many seasons for there to be fires. And so perhaps there might have been wet winters with some annual forbs that would come up that could increase the fuel load, but not every season and not very regularly. Another clue is that our keystone species in the desert, the saguaro, is not fire adapted. So saguaros are really slow growing. And so if fires were frequent, the species wouldn't have time to reproduce and establish. Also, saguaros don't have thick bark like the bur oak. If you think about them, they have this green flesh so that they can take in all the light everywhere, and they would be very vulnerable to fire. So this, along with other evidence, has really led to estimates of a fire frequency of maybe every 200 to 500 years and not that intense. And I did watch a presentation from a fire ecologist from Tonto National Forest who used context clues, and she was mentioning that it couldn't be every more than 30 years because it takes saguaros at least 30, 35 years before they're of reproductive age. So any frequenter than that, we wouldn't really see saguaros replaced on the landscape. But what we do know is that wildfires are becoming more frequent, especially since the 1980s. And reasons for that include, Doug was mentioning some of the big invasive plant species issues that we've been dealing with in the preserve and in the region. From left to right, I have photos of red brome, schismus, bufflegrass, fountain grass, and then Doug also mentioned the little globe flowered plant, which is stinknet. All of these plants increase the fuel load. They tend to spread between those natural spaces, those natural open spaces we had between native plants. They can also outcompete natives. And that combined with more human activity, there's so many more people living in the Sonoran Desert now, we can spread invasives. We can also increase ignitions. And with that combined together, we're definitely seeing that the fire regime is changing, and we're seeing more rapid and more frequent fires. Right here are some invasive plants kind of between saguaros right there. You can see that both these landscapes have been impacted. The point I wanted to make on this slide is that this is a positive feedback loop. So once you have a fire and you have these grasses there, it starts shifting towards a grass-driven fire regime with more frequent fires. So the grasses can come back readily after the fire, but some of our important keystone species like the saguaro and other succulents like yuccas and our hedgehog cactuses and our buckhorns, they take longer to grow. And so you have fast-growing grasses competing with slow-growing cacti in an environment that's more likely to burn. And we've seen this really change within the preserve itself. So we've had 3 really major fires in the 1990s. We have the Ancala fire, which was down by Lost Dog in 1993, the Granite fire, which was about 2,000 acres in 1992. And if you actually go to Browns Ranch and you're hiking on the Browns Ranch Road Trail, if you look to the west, you'll see that the plant community actually looks quite different still after 30 plus years than it does if you look to the east. That road served as a fire break in that case. We also have the Rio fire, which it was much bigger than this. This is clipped to the preserve itself. My next slide will show how much bigger it was. And then we have the Diamond fire, which was almost 2,000 acres, 270 in the preserve that happened last year. Oh, and there's one little one in the corner there that I pointed out. And there's been more than that, but those were our major ones. So this is a broader view of recent wildfires in the region. Carrie Olson, who's a steward, for those who might not know him, he recently created this map for an upcoming display about fires at Pima Dynamite Trailhead. So you're kind of getting a bit of a preview of that. But you can see on this map that the 1995 Rio fire was much bigger than the clip that I had in the last slide. You can also see that he added the Wildcat fire, which happened this month. It's actually just getting towards containment, and that has impacted 14,402 acres. And we've had quite a bit of red brome this year. We had a wet, late winter rains, so that kind of helps to I'm sure, add fuel to the fire. And this doesn't even show some of the other major fires that we've had, like the Cave Creek Complex fires or the bush fires along 87. So there's fires quite everywhere. And so what do we do? What does the desert look like after fire? One thing that we have is actual research findings right here from the preserve. Kara Barron, who's now with the Desert Seed Resource Center, she conducted her master's thesis work on post-fire plant communities, and she used the preserve as one of her study sites. And at that time, we had a position called Biodiversity Fellow, and she was in that role as a student, and the Conservancy and Stewards assisted with her work. And she studied all 3 of the major 1990s fires that we looked at in the preserve 20 plus years after them. And what she found was that plant communities were changed post-fire, even 20 plus years after recovery. And there were different plants that had different representations. So we had desert senna, catclaw acacia, brittlebush that had increased. And then others are succulent type species like hedgehogs, yucca had decreased. We also saw less penstemon, desert mistletoe, and saguaros, Wright's buckwheat. And overall, the pattern was that the slower growing Desert adapted species like the cacti and the yuccas had decreased significantly, while some of the faster growing plants like brittlebush, which is a subshrub, that's what that one would be, had increased. So along with Kara's study, we also have a lot of information. Doug was talking about past projects we've done in restoration. And so we have this really rich set of data, research results, and the experience in restoration efforts across the preserve. We have detailed maps, evaluations of past work that's been done. We have seed lists and menus. We've done work with partners on seeding techniques. We really are participating in the innovative BioCrust fieldwork that's done in partnership with NAU. And we've developed these partnerships with NAU and US Geological Survey and more. And so from all this work, we have published in peer-reviewed research papers to share with the restoration community. We also have a set of lessons learned that we're able to apply to our restoration work in the burn area. So we have now over 10 years worth of restoration research and experience to aid restoration recovery efforts in the Diamond Fire. And it's been really exciting to see that come together, even after something that we all wish didn't happen, but we're well positioned to work in that area. We also, as Doug was mentioning, have a very dedicated mapping, monitoring, and removal Steward team. I did want to highlight that they ran the numbers this year, and so far they've surveyed 22,000 acres out of the 30,500 acres in the preserve, 30,580 acres in the preserve, which is basically all the land that's not just like an extreme slope that they could get to. And they've helped remove or identify to remove 2,700 acres of invasive grasses, which have now been treated over the past 8 years or so. We also have research papers on invasive plants. We're collaborating with the city of Scottsdale on removals, and we also serve on a lot of boards and working groups related to regional collaboration on invasive plants. And this is all really key to helping with wildfire prevention work. I also wanted to point out that, and I'm sure Jessie will touch on this too in their presentation, but we have research focused on habitat connectivity and animal movement. The gooseneck, which is the area of the preserve, the name for where the Diamond Fire happened. It's kind of between Rio Verde Drive and Tom's Thumb. It's a very sensitive area of the preserve because it's narrow and it's being impacted by development, and connects the northern part of the preserve with the southern part, and is a great corridor for animals. And now it's been impacted by the Diamond Fire. And we already knew that this was an important area. So our biodiversity teams had been collecting data out there with camera footage and wildlife movement studies like the tortoise study. And so now we'll be able to compare both before and after the fire, and that'll be really interesting. We're going to go more deeply into this after the break. So you'll hear more about our collaborations with City of Scottsdale, Maricopa County Parks and Rec, Saguaro High School, and more. But I did want to mention that we have had an incredibly collaborative team working together, and there's some really inspiring work going on. So we'll talk more about that later on, but for now, I'd like to turn it over to our biodiversity manager, Jessie Dwyer, who is going to talk more about tortoise movement and the impacts of heat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary, for that introduction to fire ecology in the Sonoran Desert, and for that nice introduction to me. So like Mary said, I'm Jessie Dwyer. I'm the biodiversity manager at the McDowell Sonoran Conservancy, and I'm joined today by a steward, Rob Hallagan, who is our tortoise project lead. And we could talk for hours about the impact of extreme heat and fire on many different species in the Sonoran Desert, but we really wanted to focus on the Sonoran Desert tortoise, partly because we have relevant research about this animal, but also because they're the quintessential desert species that's very well adapted to this environment. So understanding how they're impacted by heat and fire, I think, gives us an insight into what the future will look like. We're just go ahead and start with who is the Sonoran Desert tortoise. Sonoran Desert tortoises are reptiles. So they breathe air, they're vertebrates. Their skin is dry with scales or bony plates. In this instance, tortoises have both. They are cold-blooded animals, which means they regulate their body temperature with the environment. So they may move to the sun to get warmer and get away from the sun to get cooler. They also will lay soft eggs. Tortoises, just like saguaros, are very long-lived and slow-growing. So tortoises in the wild can live 30 to 50 years old, sometimes 60 to 70 years old, up to 80 or more in captivity. So they can be around on this earth for a very, very long time. But they don't just live for a long time. They also take a long time to become an adult. So at around 13 to 15 years is when a tortoise actually becomes an adult and is able to reproduce. And until then, they're more vulnerable to the environment. Their shell is softer, and it's kind of a hard life out there for the tortoises. But once they reach adulthood, they're really hardy. So they're very strong animals with very strong shell. And the only thing that can actually predate on a fully grown Sonoran desert tortoise in this ecosystem is a mountain lion. So once they reach adulthood, they're pretty set. And they're just really incredibly well adapted to the desert environment. And we'll get into that in a second. They're also sensitive species that are protected by the state of Arizona. They are a sensitive Tier 1A conservation species of conservation concern through Arizona Game and Fish. Tortoises actually do not come with that type of equipment on their shell. That's something that we added on in order to track our tortoises. And we'll get into what that equipment is for a little bit later. But basically, we're tracking the movements of the tortoises, which allows us to know a lot more information about them. So very well adapted to the desert. So Sonoran desert tortoises get most of their water through consuming plants. They also will drink water that collects on drinking rocks, but most of their water they will get through plants. They can recycle water in their bladder to use it for long periods of time, so they can sustain themselves over periods of drought. This is super helpful with unpredictable precipitation that occurs in the Sonoran desert. And they can actually recycle that water for up to a year, which is very, very useful in the hot and dry desert. Tortoises can dig burrows, so they have really strong forearms and claws that they use to excavate the really hard desert dirt and earth. This allows them to escape extreme conditions like extreme heat or cold weather or even wildfires. They will also conserve their energy by going into what we call brumation, which is basically hibernation for reptiles, where they kind of go into a less active state and conserve their energy through the winter seasons or the winter months or the very, very hot time of year. Like I mentioned before, they're really hardy, strong animals, so they have really great deterring for predation, which helps them survive a very long time. And they also have some interesting reproductive strategies that help them out in a desert environment. Sonoran desert tortoises have one clutch or a group of eggs per year, but they can actually vary the timing of when their eggs form and when they lay their eggs. And this allows them to wait for conditions that are favorable to egg production. And studies have found that it's not really body size that indicates how many eggs or the size of eggs, it's actually body condition. So the better condition the female is in, the more eggs and larger eggs the female will have, which leads to greater reproductive success. Also, interestingly, tortoises have what we call environmental sex determination, which means depending on the temperature of the eggs in the clutch after they're hatched, depends on whether they will be male or female later. There's ranges for male and female, but basically anything above 90 degrees Fahrenheit will be female, and then anything below will be male. And so depending on the conditions when these eggs are laid will determine what sex those tortoises are. And I really want to talk about the Sonoran desert tortoise specifically because of how well adapted it is to the desert. Many people might think that wildlife that is well adapted to the desert can handle things like climate change because they're really no problem with extreme heat, no problem with drought. They have all these adaptations that can help them handle those conditions. But recent research is thinking about how desert species actually might be more vulnerable to climate change than we think, because they're often operating at their adaptive capacity limit. So they're already operating at their heat tolerance limit, at their drought tolerance limit. So as things continue to get dry and continue to get hotter, these species are near or at their ceiling of tolerance, which is very difficult to adapt to those conditions. Other studies have shown already that survival of Sonoran desert tortoises decreases with drought severity, especially tortoises that are really close to cities, which obviously impacts our Sonoran desert tortoises. And then in addition to that, a potential reduction in reproductive success if the heat or drought reduces body condition, that can reduce reproductive success. And also if temperatures continue to rise, that may also impact the environmental sex determination of the tortoises. So that's Sonoran desert tortoises and heat. What about fire? So tortoises have the ability to escape into burrows. So as far as direct harm of fire, they're able to go underground and hunker down as fires go through. But this really does depend on the intensity and the frequency of the fire. So like Mary said, historically, fires in the Sonoran desert were less intense, maybe not as hot because they didn't have the fuel load of the grasses. And so a tortoise could go underground and just wait out a fire, and it's not as big of a deal. And they're also less frequent. And so a fire goes through once in a blue moon, destroys some habitat, but eventually the desert regrows. But if it's coming through every 30 years or so, that doesn't give the saguaros a chance to come back. A lot of the native plants will be outcompeted by invasive grasses, and it just changes the ecosystem quite drastically. Particularly the one invasive grass that we're interested in as it pertains to tortoises is red brome. Studies have shown that tortoises that only eat red brome can die of malnutrition. So it's really important to have the native grasses that actually provide them nutrients and not just invasive grasses. And then of course, the invasive grasses take over a lot of their movement corridors. So that's one we're paying attention to. And then just another small fun thing is that the burrows that the tortoises create can be refuges for other species. There was a study in Australia that looked at wombat burrows and how all different types of species were using the burrows to escape the bushfire. And we have plenty of species that dig burrows in the Sonoran Desert, but it's definitely likely that their constructing of these burrows is helping out not only themselves, but also other species in times of fire. And I want to pass it over to Rob to talk about our actual tortoise project and what we're doing in the Conservancy to study and protect the tortoises.
Thank you. So we began our movement study in 2021 during COVID. And as Melanie said before, it was one of the few things you could do outside in a group that was legal and allowable. I do have to say because this is a protected species, not only under state law, but under the Federal Endangered Species Act, all our work is licensed by Arizona Game and Fish. And our site leads had to go through both classroom and field training with game and fish biologists before we were allowed to handle the animals. And also we had to be permitted by City of Scottsdale to move off trail because these tortoises live in rocky, complex terrain throughout the preserve. This year at the moment, we're tracking 20 tortoises across 9 sites. We've had as many as 26. And the purpose of the study is to evaluate the impact of urban stressors. And the urban stressors we're looking at are the edge effect, that is development that leads up to the boundary wire of the preserve, as well as motor vehicle traffic, paving of roads, and trail use as our visitor load increases in the preserve. And doing all this, not only are we doing movement studies, but we're filling knowledge gaps in habitat and behavior. The Sonoran Desert tortoise is not as well documented as the Mojave tortoise up in the Northwest, which is a true endangered species and therefore has a lot of academic and government interest. We take all this information, and the point is to inform city management of the preserve. We can present the facts and the city can decide their action. And the last point, just the overview of the project, is I do have to say as Doug mentioned, we're funded by a heritage grant through Arizona Game and Fish for the first 3 years. And the program was successful enough that it was extended into this 4th year with City of Scottsdale picking up the tab because of the importance of the information we're able to get. So next one, please. Oh, there we go. We've got 59 marked tortoises in the study. And these are tortoises we've collected, we've weighed, we've measured, we've assessed, we've documented their locations. 20 of them have transmitters on them. And that's simply because you don't need to transmit every single tortoise. If I've got a site and it has 8 tortoises in there, a mix of male and female, 1 or 2 is good enough for the site without having to spend the money to transmit every tortoise. And then we have numerous, I'm going to say upwards of 70 other incidental observations of people in the preserve have sent us all the way from Lost Dog up to Granite Mountain as they encounter tortoises on the trail and send me the information. The tortoise, this is the good news, the tortoise population in the preserve appears healthy. And we measure a healthy population by the male-female mix, the age distribution, the absence of disease called upper respiratory tract infection, which is moving from the north to the south, has not reached the Tonto or the preserve yet. And something we call body condition score. Jessie mentioned the body condition score on the females for their reproductive strategies. Body condition score looks at the hydration, the stored fat, the condition of the skin, the nares, the mouth, the eyes. And so far, it's all thumbs up on the tortoises that we have collected. One of our observations in the movement, and we're not going to do a whole movement study presentation here, is they've self-selected a microhabitat, I'll call it. And that microhabitat can be 100 to 200 yards, and they'll live their lives there. They're born there, they live there, and they die there. But what they are done is they're extraordinarily intimate with the terrain. They know the plants, they know where the water collects, they have summer burrows, they have winter burrows, and they exhibit similar movement patterns every year within this microhabitat. And some tortoises, the males, have gone on what we'll call walkabouts. And because we're getting a snapshot of their 60 or 70-year life, maybe they do this all the time and we're just seeing it. And we've had a couple that have done what I'm going to call relocations. It's interesting, the picture being shown right there is a hatchling. We have found hatchlings in small, that's the size they come out of the egg. And that particular tortoise still had its egg tooth and an egg yolk attachment to it when it was found. When they're hatched, they'll quickly skitter into shelter because they're extremely vulnerable to birds, and particularly their raven treats. Next one, please. So we, along with doing the movement tracking study, we've placed burrow cameras at several locations. And from that, we've been able to observe behaviors uninterrupted or uninfluenced by humans, by us being there. That video on the left is courtship behavior between a male and a female. That's a very characteristic head bobbing they go through. And the top center picture was the same. 2 tortoises visiting each other in a burrow. They went through a whole head bobbing ritual there and then checked out and went on their way. Nighttime, particularly now, it's 105 degrees. They will stay in shade in the burrow to regulate their temperature, but will come out in the evening to get a little food. And if it rains any month of the year, they'll come out for rain. The need for water is so desperate. The tortoise on the far right there is mining. That is, That's a female, and what she's doing is she's eating the dirt and rock. And the purpose of that is to get the trace minerals she needs that are not available through plants. And so they'll do that, that mining behavior. Next up. The burrow cams have captured over 40 species that we've counted using or visiting tortoise burrows. There's some interesting ones there. We see a lot of skunks. We've seen all 3 species of skunks, hooded, striped, and spotted. Roadrunner with a lizard in its beak, a gray fox checking out the burrow, a mountain lion, various snakes. We've cataloged three species of rattlesnake, the western diamondbacks, of course, blacktail and tiger rattlesnakes. That, I think, is a western patchnose. And to Jessie's point about burrows as a refuge, other animals in that habitat know these are tortoise burrows, and they visit them. They visit them regularly. And yes, they could serve as shelter. In particular, I have Juan Fogel's feet there. Not all burrows are small, and an animal could easily find refuge in there. So let's talk about a couple of tortoise stories. Melanie kind of previewed that these are not going to be happy stories, but they're stories I need to tell. The first one is tortoise 709. 709 was found by one of our teams on their way home from a telemetry event on 128th Street in the construction area there, just north of Tom's Thumb, where Story Rock is being built. And that's 709 curbside out on 128th. Now, they stopped. Normally, if you would find a tortoise on a roadside, the correct thing to do is to pick it up gently, keep it low to the ground, and move it the direction it was going, right? Help it across that road and let it go. In this case, it would have meant releasing the tortoise into an active bladed construction site on either side of the road. So we called Arizona Game and Fish, the tortoise program at Arizona Game and Fish. Outside the preserve, we don't have any authority or permissions that any other Arizona resident doesn't have. We have nothing special outside the preserve. Our permit's only for there. And their direction to us was if we could safely move that tortoise out of the construction zone and into the preserve. So we took the opportunity, since we had the equipment with us, to go ahead and what we say is process that tortoise, weigh it, measure it, evaluate it, install a transmitter, mark it, and install a GPS unit. And that tortoise was moved into just inside the preserve boundary there at Tom's Thumb, but definitely out of the construction zone. Next up. So that tortoise moved from the vicinity of the Tom's Thumb gate up into the foothills there and lived there for a year. Unfortunately, that tortoise was maladapted to that region. It started healthy. It went through a year of decline. And when it was in decline, it was visible from the trail. And a visitor decided that tortoise was being tortured because it had this equipment on it. And I'll assure you they're not tortured because they have an equipment. And that visitor took that tortoise, stole it, removed it from the preserve, and dropped it at the exotic animal hospital in Cave Creek. Okay, there's several things wrong with this. One, it's a violation of state and federal law to steal tortoises. It's extremely stressful to the tortoise. You got to remember, this tortoise then would have been picked up, carried out, put in a car, driven over to Cave Creek, dropped at a hospital. And that's the picture in the middle if it's on the exam table at the hospital. The person left. the hospital realized that they had an illegally taken tortoise. They told Game and Fish. Game and Fish knew it was one of ours. Connections were made, and we got that tortoise back, and we re-released him there on the right into his known habitat. However, sadly, that tortoise did not survive. It continued to become more dehydrated, more emaciated, and did pass away through a combination of, we think, stressors. I'm not a game biologist, so I can't swear to you what happened, but that tortoise lived an unfortunate last year of its life because of these stressors. So let's look at another tortoise story. Not quite as sad. This is 210. 210 was a very old male. We did have a senior retired biologist from Game and Fish with us, and he estimated that tortoise is easily 70 years old. And we captured him, processed him, hydrated him, and followed that tortoise for 2 years. And as he made his movements around the Tom's Thumb area, and let's look at those movements that he was making. So this is a wide-ranging tortoise. If he was 70 years old, that meant he was born in 1955, right? 1950. Nothing was there. All those houses you see on the map, the roads, none of that was there. This was his life. And this was his movement area. And since then, in the 90s with the Rio fire, and then recently with the Diamond fire, and with the construction, which is not totally shown on this map, of Sereno Canyon on one side and Story Rock on the other side, this tortoise lost his home range where he had been living for many, many years. He eventually left his home and went into the county park on the right there, and then on the left, spent a winter in the gooseneck, and we tracked him, let him have his life. We tracked him, and then we lost him. And he turned up on the far left there on Troon Mountain in somebody's backyard. Let's show that. And we only found this out because it was posted on social media, and of a gentleman doing the right thing. He found our tortoise on the highway and he moved it off the roadway into the brush on the side. Tortoise continued to move, got stuck in a backyard fence. And again, that resident called the Arizona Game and Fish, which is the right thing to do. They knew it was one of ours. They got a hold of us. I went out there and collected it. And we brought it back to his home territory in the preserve and released him. And that's a field of owl clover, not red brome. He, however, also was never happy going back. He had left for some reason. And we brought him back at Game and Fish direction. And he also relocated into the foothills of Tom's Thumb there. And he also expired, most likely of old age, peacefully of old age. But that was a tortoise that over 70 years fulfilled his biological imperative. He had girlfriends probably all over the town there. And but the last summer, brutally hot, he did go through a relocation, even though as gentle as we could be. And there was a consequence. So Jessie, talk about the consequences.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. So one of the things that we're kind of talking about here with all of these different factors that are contributing potentially to these tortoises passing away, and we're thinking about these as compounding stressors. So both of these tortoises had interaction with urbanization. 709 on the active construction sites. 210 actually had 2 years where he went into the construction zone, and then the large traveling he did into the gooseneck area, and finally the housing development. So these are tortoises that are interacting intimately with rapid urbanization. So we're seeing potential effects of habitat loss on these long-lived species. On top of that, there are tortoises that are being removed from the wild, which can be really detrimental to their health for the reasons that Rob mentioned, and also disease spread as well, which is why it's one of the reasons why it's illegal to release tortoises in the wild as well. And then on top of that, last summer, we had one of the hottest summers on record. I think last year was the hottest year on record in the last 2,000 years. And particularly that month of July, where we had 30 days of consecutive temperatures over 110, was very difficult for someone like this tortoise, 210, who's older, already stressed out in some other way. It's kind of a compounding stressor. With 709, we also found that it didn't seem like he really had established burrows. So like Rob was mentioning, some of our tortoises, they have their summer burrow, their winter burrow, their drinking rock. They go to it every year. They have a very similar movement pattern. And 709 just did not have an established microhabitat. And so when things like a super hot summer hits, or a removal from the wild, it just really adds to that stress and that impact. And then on top of that, we had a wildfire come through again in that gooseneck area, which we at least have one tortoise documented moving through that area and using it as a travel corridor. And then on top of that, 709 had some dehydration issues and poor health, and 210 had some old age. So we're thinking about this as, large fires or increased heat might be something that some of the tortoise population can handle, but tortoises that are particularly vulnerable are ones that have these compounding stressors and urban stressors. So overall, what is the impact of heat and fire on tortoises? So there's indirect and direct harm. So a fire comes through, hopefully tortoises can burrow underground, but those fires can reduce native quality habitat, increase invasive species, change the regime in something that tortoises may not be adapted for. We have those compounding stressors that are added on top of all the other factors and all the other threats that tortoises are facing. And on top of that, they might be at their limit of adaptive capacity. So already operating at their heat tolerance, already operating at their drought tolerance. So added things like more frequent and severe wildfires or increased temperatures or prolonged drought can be detrimental to the tortoise population down the line. And then we have a potential future decline in reproductive success as we have more years of drought and increased temperatures that may affect the sex determination, the sex ratio of tortoise hatchlings, as well as the body condition of our tortoises. That's a lot, but it's not, all hope is not lost. There are many things that we can do, and many things that we already are doing to help mitigate these issues. One of those would be managing invasive grasses. So that helps reduce fire, which also helps increase the amount of native habitat that tortoises have available for resource availability and for traveling. Restoring the burned areas. So like we mentioned, if fires are happening every 30 years, the saguaros cannot keep up. So the work that we do to add saguaros to establish in those burned areas can help that native habitat grow back. Protecting and conserving open space. So as urbanization creeps in and as people increase visitation, we'll want to make sure we have protected open space for these long-lived species to continue traveling around their home ranges. Any sort of reduction in compounding stressors can be really helpful. So our education initiatives to try to explain to people not to remove tortoises from the preserve is a really good example of reducing a compounding stressor so that a tortoise might maybe be experiencing urbanization and heat, but maybe not also removal from the preserve. So working to reduce those compounding stressors so that tortoises can handle the increased stress of the environment. And of course, continue studying the Sonoran desert tortoise. So there's still a lot we don't understand. We do have 4 years of movement data and some really incredible data we've got from the burrow cameras and just from being out there with the tortoises. But like I mentioned before, these are really long-lived species. So every year is just a snapshot of their lives. And we only know what we have on the data we've collected. And so we really want to see what happens over long, long periods of time and how these tortoises react to rapid environmental change. And that's all. Big thank you to all of the citizen scientists on the tortoise team and all of our partners that help with this project. And thank you, Rob.
So one of my jobs on the symposium today is to go through keep track of the chat log and bring some questions forward. Here in the introduction, we just got a couple of things. One, I want to say Lori Shriver from the U.S. Geological Survey is the manager of RestoreNet, has been kind enough to put her email and website for RestoreNet into the chat log. So during the break, you might want to, copy, cut, paste that, and at some other time, look at the website and see what all is going on in RestoreNet. And we did get one question from Sylvie on how do you determine the age of tortoises? I'll take a try at that. It's an art and a science. Part of the science is we measure the carapace length. The carapace is the top shell of a tortoise. And by looking at the length of that carapace, we put them into groups of juveniles, subadults, and adults, because the tortoise will continue to grow through its life. Also, when sexual characteristics appear for the first time, the males will form testosterone glands underneath their chins, and their plastern, which is the undershell, will also indent for mating purposes so they can mate with the females. And that's the science part. The art is you'll look at an awful lot of tortoises and you compare them with tortoises that are in captivity or have been in captivity, and you have a known birth year or age of that tortoise. Did I get it right, Jessie?
Yeah, and that's a good mention about the captivity is, tortoises will grow faster if they have a lot of resources. So sometimes the tortoises in captivity look a bit different than the tortoises in the wild do. But really we can tell age in those age classes. And then once we get to adulthood, it can be very, very difficult to tell. But some of the things that we're looking for is the wear and tear on a tortoise. Does it seem like this tortoise has been out for 1 decade, or is it really kind of worn and torn like our 210 was? And that can give us an indication of the age, but really a lot of it is just estimations and experience being around tortoises of different age classes, but it's not really like tree rings where you can actually definitively tell the exact age of tortoises. Rob, you want to tell them the story of the tortoise in your profile picture?
Oh, so that's another tortoise that showed up in a neighborhood across the street from Gateway. And again, the residents, well, it's Katie Black's sister. She called Katie. Katie knew us. We said call Game and Fish, and they said if you can if you can put it in the preserve, please do so. The reason they keep telling us to do that is there's a tortoise adoption program they run for the state, and it's overwhelmed. They have more tortoises in captivity up at the headquarters than they'll ever be able to adopt out. So whenever possible and it's appropriate, they would rather see a tortoise return to the wild and let it have a chance. And so I went over and collected that tortoise, big, healthy male. We released him into the Gateway area with a transmitter and a GPS, and we're following him. He is having a successful reintroduction. He's doing well. He wintered well, and he's moving through the landscape and maintaining a good body health. So it's just another interesting data point to study and follow relocated tortoises and maybe find the better or the best way to help those animals.
Thank you for that, Rob. It's nice to get that success story because I was about to cry during your last presentation. It was really good, but yeah, this is the second section of Restoring for a Hotter and Drier Future. And in this section, we're going to talk about restoration. So in the first, it was about how it happens, what happens, when you have extreme heat and fire. And here, it's all about what we can do about it. So the first presentation is Mary, again, talking about our large-scale saguaro planting and experimental approach. So take it away, Mary.
Thanks, Melanie. I have some fun, happy stories to share. Tortoises are wonderful to look at, but I know we had some sad stories about them. So hi again, everyone. I am really looking forward to sharing with you what we've been doing in 2 projects related to saguaros, and both are taking an experimental approach. So again, before we dive in, I wanted to do some background and take a step back and think about how iconic saguaros are and why they're so important. So for me personally, I know that I was drawn to the Sonoran Desert because of the beautiful, and when I first moved here, I thought very unusual saguaro, and I know a lot of other people have felt that way too. On top of being just amazing and beautiful, saguaros are incredibly important to the Sonoran Desert ecosystem. They're called a keystone species, and some of you might have heard that term before. And what it means is that they're a critical resource for the whole ecosystem. And without them, a major cascading effect of changes would occur. So they provide food and shelter to many different species, over 100 actually. And they can provide food, shelter, all kinds of important benefits. And there's species like the lesser long-nosed bat in southern Arizona and the white-winged doves up here in the Phoenix area, who are actually in our backyards and our desert right now, taking advantage of flowers and fruits. And this is a wonderful photo by our phenology lead, Wendy Renner. She took this photo of a white-winged dove eating a saguaro fruit. And we monitor the phenology or the life cycle timings of events like fruiting and flowering of saguaros in the preserve. And we also monitor the arrival and departure times of white-winged doves because they arrive here when saguaros are blooming. They time that specifically for their arrival. And so that's just one example of how saguaros are incredibly important to wildlife. Saguaros also have a very important cultural significance and use to indigenous peoples in the Sonoran Desert. And as we've said before, they are iconic. And so now that we've taken a moment to appreciate them, I feel a little bit more comfortable talking about why we're putting all of this energy into restoring them. And so over the past 2 years or so, we've had the opportunity to work on saguaro projects with the goal of restoring saguaros and studying their establishment, especially now in the Diamond Fire Burn area. These have all been really fun, exciting collaborative efforts. And I'll focus on 2 of them, 2 experimental projects. One we focused heavily on last year at our symposium, but I wanted to give an overview again of that one. It's a project with Saguaro High School called Living Labs. And then, and it's part of our youth education work. And another project that we just started this past spring in the Burn area. So about 2 years or so ago, we began a pilot project called Living Labs. And we started, Scottsdale Unified School District was very supportive of this. Melanie took the lead in spearheading this, and we got together this team, this really excited group of students and an excited teacher from Saguaro High School in a club that they have called Eco Club. And the concept was to give high school students real world experiences in ecological studies. So they would both be on their campus and in the preserve, and they would think about all the connections between the built environment and the natural world and connectivity. And so because all of this would be their lab, we called it a Living Lab project. And so we decided to start by designing a Saguaro Nurse Association experiment on their school campus. And you can kind of guess the reasons why. One, we just talked about saguaros are incredibly important, but also it's called Saguaro High School, and it just seemed like a really good fit. And so the idea was to pair this experiment with a sister site in the preserve, and we installed the school grounds experiment in April of 2023. And so the Saguaro nurse experiment at the school, it's focused on testing different associations, and we're calling those nurse associations. And the reason for that is because there's different associations out in the desert between saguaros and different plants and potentially rocks, and they offer different types of support for the saguaro. So these could be things like shade, nutrients, mycorrhizal fungi associations, protection from extreme temperatures, either heat or cold. And the nurses can be various. So we chose a couple different types of nursing, and we focused on that with the students. So we picked shading, we picked nurse plants, we picked triangle leaf bursage, and we picked nurse rocks, which actually are a cinder block from Lowe's or Home Depot, because it was regular, because this is an experiment. So we wanted everything to be uniform. The various combinations of those, and then our control was a saguaro out in the open. And so there are 40 saguaros as part of this experiment, and then 20 of the plants, 20 of the bricks, 20 of the shading, and various combinations. And the students actually put together this diagram right here, which I think is a great way to both emphasize that they understood what they were doing, and then to help tell that story to future students that help with this project. And so this has been a really amazing opportunity, I think, for all of us, and especially for the students, to learn about real life ecology fieldwork. They have had fieldwork experience. They've now been digging, planting, and monitoring for over a year, and they've really helped with all aspects of this project. They've started with helping us with the project design and selecting what kind of nurse associations we would look at. They've helped with the hard work of digging and planting. And they've been taking data now on the saguaro establishment. So they took some baseline measurements of the height, of how much the nurse plant was covering each of the plots. And then they've been doing that in the fall and this past spring as well. And Melanie mentioned at the beginning that not only have they been working on this project, but they've been communicating about it. I'd really encourage you, it's on YouTube, you can take a look. The students presented on this project at last year's symposium, and it was really inspiring and worth a second look if you've seen it before too. So you'll take a deeper dive into that project if you look at that. And then they've also now published in Cactus and Succulents on this experiment. And so we really want to thank their teacher as well, Scott Milne. He's been an incredible champion for this project and guided the students throughout, and connected us to all of these great students. And so after the spring installation at the school of this saguaro project, we anticipated putting a sister site near Frazefield the following school year. But then we had the Diamond Fire in June of 2023. So just a couple months after we put in our project. And we had all these resources. We still had over 126 saguaros left to put in for the other sister site. And we wanted to shift our focus to the burn area so that the saguaros were part of that restoration. And just to show the impact of wildfires, you'll hear more about what these pictures are a part of when you hear from our partner, Juanita Armstrong-Ullberg from the county. But I wanted to give you some visuals of what it looks like out there post-burn. This is actually from this past April. We've been out there surveying saguaros, and you can see like number 77 is a little young saguaro, and it made it through. The fire skipped it, and it's actually with a triangle leaf bursage, I believe, there. But many of the other ones were very burned and are likely to die or already down already. You can also see there's a lot of red brome out there, and that grass could contribute to future fires. And so there's a real need to restore saguaros into the burn area. Let's see. There we go. It was slow. So after the Diamond Fire, we did move the Saguaro project to the burn area. But I also did want to note that we've also greatly expanded our collaborations and restoration projects in general with a lot of different partners. And so we've been working with the city of Scottsdale, with the county, with Scottsdale Community College, with NAU. And some of the projects we've worked on are, we have 18 photo points that stewards are going out monthly to. And they are both in the preserve side and the county side, and that's helping us document 1 full year of what recovery looks like out there. Juanita from the county had already been collecting seeds with her Desert Defenders program and generously let us put some on the preserve side too. So we've helped with seed ball making, throwing, and monitoring. We've done seed collection, and we're going to continue to do more of that in collaborative planning. And then on top of that, we were able to move this Saguaro project to the burn area, get students involved, get stewards involved, and all in all, expand this project to be able to make it a very restoration-focused project, but also collect data and information on the best ways to establish saguaros in a post-burn environment. So we have 126 4-year-old saguaros out there, and they have a really fun story. They're the exact same cohort that are planted at the school, and they all were grown out by Gila Watershed Partnership on what day was it? It was New Year's Eve 2019. So they all have the same birth date, I guess you could call it. They were all sown on the same day. And so I thought that was really a great thing for an experiment, and we were very happy to have that resource. And so we decided that instead of outplanting with the same nurse associations that we tested at the school, like we previously thought we would do, so we decided not to go with nurse rocks, the shading and triangle leaf burr sage as our treatments, because we really wanted to focus on what resources were left in the landscape. So if you were out there trying to restore saguaros, you probably wouldn't bring in a bunch of cinder blocks. As nurse rocks, you might want to look at what's there first. So there were a lot of burned but standing Palo Verdes, foothill Palo Verdes, sometimes they're called yellow Palo Verdes, and they could potentially provide shade and other benefits to the saguaros. And so we shifted to planting saguaros in association with dead standing Palo Verdes, with resprouting Palo Verdes, and added, here you can see these little tiny guys, 28 small new Palo Verdes that were grown out by Scottsdale Community College, with the support of John Wesser and Natalie Case, and some stewards over there helping. And SCC also took care and housed these saguaros for over a year for us while we were looking for a home for this project. So we're very thankful for that. And right here, my map here shows where the saguaros are in the burn area. So the yellow right there, the yellow highlighter type color, is the 1995 Rio fire. The red horizontal lines, that's the Diamond Fire from last summer. And you can see that we have 4 different squares, and those are the different areas that we've planted the saguaros in. So we have a section that's planted only in the 1995 Rio fire. We have a no burn area, and those can serve as our control to see how those saguaros grow. We have some planted out in an area that only burned in the Diamond Fire. And then we have some growing in an area that burned both in the 1990s and last year. And I won't walk you through all the details of the experimental design, but I did want to show how cool this diagram is that our assistant restoration lead, John Parenti, put together. So the experimental design was created and led. Our PI is Dr. Helen Rowe. And we've all been participating in this project and along for the ride of designing it. And so John put together this experimental layout protocol. And I think it's, if it might look like foreign language to you right now, but when you start to work on this project, it's an extremely helpful way to understand the treatments of our project. And so it's showing here that we're testing 5 different planting conditions. Palo Verdes that are alive, they might be resprouted or in the no burn area, never burned. Palo Verdes that died but are still standing. The new Palo Verdes, one's out in the open. We planted some just out in the open, some out in the open with compost. And on top of that, we've added either live soil or sterile soil from nearby soils under Palo Verdes that didn't burn. And the reason for that is because soil inoculum could contain beneficial bacteria and fungi to support saguaro growth. And so that's an added treatment there. And we've also planted them all on the north side of the dead or resprouting Palo Verdes because there's no leaves and there's a lot of open space. And so by putting them on the north, we're hoping that that gives them more shade and cover for that treatment. And so we all are protected with 30-centimeter diameter, 1 foot tall camouflage cages. And the Palo Verdes have slightly taller cages because there might be more herbivory on them. We've already seen one been pulled out from the bottom though, which we knew might happen. So I was saying that this project has been really inspiring and collaborative and fun, and it's been a real great way to bring together different programs within the Conservancy. So citizen science and CNM have worked very closely on this project, and we're very thankful for all of CNM's hard work on it. They've helped make our cages, install rebar, dig holes, bring water out there, and spread the word that we're doing this work as well. On the citizen science side, we've created a dedicated trained citizen science core team for this project to help ensure that all the protocols were followed and that all the saguaros received the correct treatments. So they were planted for success, both for a general restoration perspective and also for collecting data on our treatments. And then on top of that, another aspect of this has been working with youth education. Our team here at the Conservancy has been very supportive of getting the Eco Club involved. And we've had the Eco Club out both in the fall to help with distributing seed balls and to learn about the burn and the issue of wildfires in the Sonoran Desert. And then to come back out in March to help with planting and taking initial measurements on the saguaros. So we want to get those baseline measurements of the saguaro height, of the height of our new Palo Verdes, of the canopy cover. And so I think it was a really great way to make the connection for the students between the on-the-ground post-fire restoration work and the value of their campus saguaro nurse experiment. And then because of all of this work going on in the preserve, there's been a lot of added opportunities for the students to get involved on the restoration front. And so the students have taken restoration efforts really to the next level with some side projects here. They got a chance to learn about our ongoing BioCrust work with NAU, and they actually decided that they wanted to do their own experiment on BioCrust and could use some of the information we taught them about experimental design. And they're actually taking old trophy cases from their school and they're self-directing their own BioCrust experiment. We gave them what they needed for it, the materials, but they're taking the lead on it. So I'm excited to see what they do with that. We've already talked about the seed ball making and dispersal they've done. They've also hosted a table at Expedition Days Live where the public and homeschool students came out to the preserve in that great event hosted by our youth education team. And they were wonderful. They were able to talk very knowledgeably about restoration, about the work that they're doing with the experiments, and be able to share information about all different kinds of aspects of restoration, invasive plant species removal, their pollinator garden. It was really great to hear them talk about it. And they've also, I guess I should mention this, they've removed invasive plants on their campus, learned about that, and created a pollinator garden. So I guess one other thing I wanted to mention, so we did talk about some of the outcomes like their publication, but I did want to mention that one of the students actually wrote an abstract about the experiment and used it in applications for college this year. I thought that was really great. And so coming back to the Preserve Saguaro project, this past couple months and even going into the summer, we've been really busy taking baseline growth data on the saguaros. You can see on this diagram here, we have what looks like a pin and then a pin flag. And that's a pretty accurate representation, except for the pin head itself, of what we're doing to take the height measurements. We put a little pin, like a corsage type pin, into the cactus, not far enough to do any lasting harm or anything, but so that it would stay there for the long term. And then we would take a pin flag and we're taking the height measurement, and we'll come back in the fall and we'll do the same thing and we'll be able to measure the change. And we've also been measuring the areoles, which are the little clusters of spines that come out of the saguaro, and the depth between the ribs. We're also characterizing the canopy with various methods, and we have some of that coming up still if you're interested in getting out there with us very early in the morning. And so for first year establishment, this is a major group effort. And so if you're interested in participating, we still have many opportunities to help this summer. These are nursery babies. They've been outside for the last year, but they were still under a shade kind of platform type thing. And so they really need our support this first year in the field. We're going to baby them a little bit before we let the treatments kind of start to decipher which ones do better. And so we're going to be watering them once a month through the summer. We're also adding shade cloth, which is going to be added this Friday. If anyone wants to come, I think there's still a couple spots on Better Impact if you're a steward. And I can get you signed up if you're not a steward too. And we're also going to be doing some soil collection to characterize the soil. So if you are interested, you can look on Better Impact, or you could reach out to me. If you're not a steward as well, we can get you out there. And so what's next? Well, we're going to continue monitoring both the saguaro experiment at the school and the saguaro experiment in the field. And that experimental approach is going to really help us understand the best post-fire methodology to plant about 4-year-old saguaros, because that's what we have right now. And when we looked up information, there was a lot out there for planting little itty bitty saguaros and then big ones, and a little bit less about the ones in the age category that we're looking to plant. And then we're going to be doing more cacti transplanting and seeding. So if you're interested in getting out there, digging holes, putting cacti out in the ground, we'd love to have you out there with us in the fall. We're going to be looking at our list of species, like we talked about in our previous presentation, that struggle to come back 20 plus years even after a fire, and we're going to be focusing on those. And then we're going to be doing some native seed collection in the future, continuing our monitoring projects. If you are interested in invasive plant removal and mitigation, it's very important, and that team is always looking for support. And we're going to continue doing planning for the future desert. We know that we can't have the same desert that was here in the 1700s, 1800s, 1900s. We're dealing with new issues. We're dealing with the changing climate. And so we want to plan for successful restoration practices. And so we're considering that as well. And then finally, I've really enjoyed being a part of these projects. It's been very meaningful to work with such amazing people on it. And just wanted to say the thank yous at the end. So a huge thank you to everyone who's made this a reality. To Melanie, our Director of Science and Education, who really got this up and running. To the City of Scottsdale, the Bob and Renee Parsons Foundation, and the Arizona State Parks and Trails for supporting this work. To Scottsdale Unified School District, Scott Milne and the Eco Club. They've been great partners on this. Scottsdale Community College, for all the work you've done supporting the plants. And to Dr. Helen Rowe, who's the principal investigator on these projects, and all her work both for the Conservancy and Northern Arizona University is such an asset. And to Juanita Armstrong-Ullberg, who has provided all kinds of gracious support for the restoration out there. And you'll hear more about the projects we're collaborating on soon. And of course, our steward teams. This has been so collaborative and such a great opportunity to meet more stewards from across the different programs, from the youth education team, construction and maintenance team, and the citizen science team. Everybody's been out there with smiling faces, working hard, and so we're looking forward to more. All the restoration out there is making a difference. So now I want to introduce you to Juanita Armstrong-Ullberg, who is the Natural Resource Specialist for Maricopa County Parks and Recreation, and she'll be talking about regional approaches to restoration. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. You guys are doing some really great work. It's really exciting. I can't wait to see what we find, what y'all discover out there. Hi, everyone. I'm Juanita, as Mary just mentioned, with Maricopa County Parks and Rec. Thank you guys for having me at your symposium. So Really appreciate it. We've been doing some really great work together as a collaborative. So I'm gonna share my screen. And hopefully the way I do this works. Meaning, all right, let me start slideshow. All right, let me know if you guys can see that okay. Awesome. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the regional approach that we took to restoring. And a lot of this really stemmed from this diamond wildfire. So although, of course, horrible reason for us all to get together and work on a wonderful collaboration came out of it. So that's kind of exciting. So you guys probably all know this, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide, but I just wanted to kind of, since I'm talking high level regional planning that we were doing together, I felt the need to talk about the day of the fire itself. And basically, you know, it started in June 27th, and there was a multi-agency response that was led by the city of Scottsdale, Maricopa sheriffs, and then the parks themselves helped with that and worked really closely with those two agencies to initiate the wildland fire plan that the parks had. So here's the diamond fire area, and you've seen this image already from Mary in a different perspective. So basically 2,000 acres of the McDowell Mountain burned. And we weren't even allowed in there until July 5th. And so as soon as July 5th hit, me, Scott from the city of Scottsdale, and Dave Myers all got together and went out there just to assess the damage that the wildfire did to the park and the natural resources. And so we kind of just went out there and looked at it. And then we met again, and Mary came out the second time, and Melanie also, I believe, came out. And so we just kind of talked about a plan moving forward and what we kind of want to do. So here are all the partners. And I apologize, Helen, I didn't have your NAU's logo, but here, you know, this is a group of folks that got together to partner and start talking about the recovery of the McDowell Mountain. And we are working on that recovery plan together as a team, because the fire doesn't know boundaries, and neither, you know, should the restoration of it. So the Maricopa County GIS team actually went out and did the drone imagery right away. And I think I talk about that on another slide. So I made sure to include them. And obviously, Maricopa County Parks and Rec, Parsons Field Institute, McDowell Sonoran Conservancy, City of Scottsdale, all got together right away to try to plan out how we're going to recover after this wildfire. And so as part of that recovery for the McDowell Mountain, you know, the first step was going to be fire effects monitoring. So we did some initial observations, and we talked about how to monitor the effects of wildfire. And so Maricopa County Parks had some experience doing this from our 2020 wildfire season, because we had 3 wildfires within our park systems. And so we had already had some protocol set up to monitor trees, shrubs, saguaro, cacti, and then the actual like burn intensity. So we kind of used what we knew already and what we learned from those wildfires, and we modified it for this for the fire effects monitoring for the diamond wildfire. And then we started talking about meeting for developing a recovery plan, which we have had a couple meetings, and we have started that as well as a collaborative. And then native seed collection and deployment, which will be part of that recovery plan. But we already had a program in place, and we had some seed bombs available. So we started, you know, planting or deploying some of those seed bombs right away, right after the wildfire. I think it was like a month later. Invasive species management is going to play a huge role. And I'm going to talk more about that on another slide. And then vegetation and cacti replanting, which you guys are, the folks at McDowell Parsons Institute, McDowell Sonoran Conservancy, are already starting to do some research on, which is great. So I know you're going to see a couple pictures that Mary also used in her presentation, because it is a collaborative and we are sharing all of our resources. So this is a picture that we took when we were observing the wildfire area. And on the south side of this trail, this is actually in the McDowell-Sonoran Preserve. The south side of the trail, you can see the whole burn area. And on the right side of the trail, what you see is what fueled that wildfire. And Mary talked about this in her presentation. The invasive species that fueled this wildfire was specifically red broom and Mediterranean grass. And so those aren't species, that's like the elephant in the room, I have to say. Those aren't species that we are currently managing, but we need to start thinking about how to triage, because they are everywhere. We need to start thinking about how we're going to triage and select specific areas where we do manage for these species. For our monitoring protocol, basically we set up long-term Saguaro transect monitoring. And I modified this from research that was done in 1993 of a similar project where they were monitoring Saguaro, and they used quarter plats. And so we did that when we did 2020. We didn't feel like our sample size of Saguaro was big enough. So we just modified that to include every saguaro within our 160-foot circular plat, basically. And so I don't know if you guys, hopefully you guys can see my arrow. So this is our circular plat. It's roughly 5 meters, which is 160 feet. And so we monitored every saguaro that was in our plats. And then we also did a 20 by 20 foot cacti shrub plats where we documented all the cacti and the shrubs that we were able to identify to species. And then we drone imagery was one of the first things that we did was work with our GIS team. So they did a combination of 200-foot elevation drone elevation or 200-foot flights and that or imagery, and then they did 100-foot and 50-foot flights. And when I show you another slide, I'll talk a little bit more about why we did those 3 different layers. And then burn severity. I'm not going to talk a lot about that, but I do have one slide where we just talk about what the severity of that burn is. And it's really important to recognize that because that helps us determine what type of restoration we really need to work on. And then we set up the photo plots that the McDowell-Sonoran Conservancy has been working on. So overall, the burn severity of the Diamond wildfire we determined was low to moderate severity. And, you know, basically what that means is below ground soil did not scorch. It was everything that scorched was above ground for the most part. And then there were some trees that burned down all the way to their roots, but the majority of them did not. And so that would be where we would consider that burn intensity more moderate. So overall, it was low to moderate throughout. And as you can see in this top picture, you know, you'll see a lot of schistous and red broom didn't even burn in some areas. It was patchy. In some areas, in other areas, you know, there was complete consumption of the fuel. So that's where you get the low to moderate. That kind of tells us, you know, that the seed in the soil, you know, and the roots that are there from the trees that burn are going to likely resprout. And so we're seeing that now. And so that's kind of what that burn severity gives us, that information. So the picture on the left is the Maricopa County GIS team going out to do their drone imagery. And so they did it last year, but they also did it this year. So we'll have some comparison of that information moving forward. And then the picture on the right that you see of the map, that's the Diamond wildfire area with the 4 transects. That's the T1 through T4. Those are the Saguaro transects. And those circles are those 160-foot plats that I showed, that we kind of showed a graphic of a minute ago. So the T1 and T2 are where they are because those are the ones we did on the ground right away after the fire. And then we did some experimenting to see if drone imagery could help us to do the monitoring for each of these saguaro out in the field. And so basically you have to give each saguaro a burn classification and whether it was burned, you know, 1%, 5%, 25%, 75% of the saguaro had been scorched. And we used the Brown and Blomquist classification system. And so we were hoping to be able to do that from imagery, and we were not able to do that from imagery. I think if the imagery gets a little bit better, you know, the technology, advances a little bit, we might be able to do that, but we weren't with a RGB spectrum technology that they used last year. And so we did have to go out and monitor by foot, by hand, in person, the T3 and T4 to get our results for the Saguaro burn damage. And then the orange circles that you're seeing are the photo plots that the McDowell-Sonoran Conservancy volunteers have been going out and monitoring fairly regularly. So when we monitor the Saguaro, we take all the demographics, the height, number of arms, and things like that. And we use an app for that. However, if the Saguaro falls apart like this picture on the left, we had to use a tape measure. So because the app measures like the base and then the height, and then it gives you, or the base and the top of the Saguaro, and then it gives you the height of it. It does a calculation for you. So we had to do the calculation for saguaros that had already burned and fell down. And then these are the photo plots. This is just one example of, we had 18 total photo plots. This is photo plot 10. And so the McDowell-Sonoran Conservancy has been going out each regularly. I don't know if it's monthly or every other month, but here is from September 2023, shortly after the wildfire. And then the picture on the right is November 2023 from the same view. And then February 17th. And then you got May 15th, 2024. So what you're seeing here in the May 2024 is all that red Roman schismus coming right back. So it's very favorable, like Mary mentioned in her presentation. Invasive grasses benefit from wildfires. So that's something we need to really talk about and work in our recovery plan, how to manage. These are the original results. This is just from Transect 1 and 2, because I haven't pulled all this together for Transect 3 and 4, just for the cacti results. But the gist of this is that the majority of the cacti in those 20 by 20 foot plots had 75 to 100% scorch. And that included hedgehog, buckhorn cholla, chainfruit cholla, and Christmas cholla. And that's the 4 that we really found in all of our plots so we can measure those. So that's, that shows that that's the majority, which means those are the species that, we're going to have to recover long-term in addition to saguaro. So this is the Transect saguaro results. We had 66 total plots in our 4 transects, and 37 of those 64 saguaro cacti scored what we call a class 5, which is 75% scorch or greater. That's a lot. So in my next slide, we're going to show you what happened post 1 year. And so then the demographics I only have for T1 and T2. I just haven't pulled T3 and T4 together yet. So for those, we had 27 saguaros. 16 of them were just the main stem with no arms, and that's what the M here stands for. And then, it means basically they were, less than 50 years old, and some of them much less, like 0.65 feet high, so that's a pup, obviously. So it's just demographics that we may be able to use down the road to help us with restoring the area and trying to bring in new saguaros. And then 13 had arms of variable numbers from 2 to 23, with the heights ranging from 12.6 all the way up to 30.3. So that's just kind of the basic demographics. And this pie chart just shows what I told you up here. Like 37 of the saguaros had 75% or more scorch. So we know those are going to die. 7 of them had 51 to 75% scorch, likely to die. The 9 of them had 26 to 50% scorch. Anything over 30% is likely to die within within 10 to 15 years. That's the rule of thumb that we've been provided with from the Tonto National Forest based on their fire effects monitoring. So when we went out 1 year later, what we found was 45% of the saguaros that we've monitored to date are dead. An additional 25, that's 30.7% more, are showing signs of stress with scorch levels above 25%. So we predict those saguaros are likely going to perish within the next few years. I broke this down in two ways for visual people. Some folks like these pie charts better. It's super easy to see. Everything in black is dead and down. Everything in the gray is standing, but with a score of 3. So we're expecting all of those to die. So this is a much higher number than I expected. And it's higher than what we put together from our 2020 results, but not much. So I think at 1 year we found those to be more at around 35% were dead or down. However, there are variables with the fires. There was large patches at Cave Creek that didn't burn. The saguaros weren't burned at all. There was some patchiness to this wildfire, but most of the areas where we had saguaros, they burned pretty well and fairly consistently. So even though we don't have our recovery plan, in place, we did start working on the seed bomb deployment that Mary was talking about this already, because we had them available already, because we were working on other projects in the park system. And so we got together, and you can see this picture on the left. We went out and deployed roughly 3,000 seed bombs in the area. So this is the very first year we've ever done seed bomb deployment. And so it was fairly new to us. And the research showed, which is mostly done in the Tucson area, that the way we make these seed bombs was going to be effective and work. But we're finding now that we need to adapt our management strategy, and we'll probably do a couple different things this upcoming year. But the picture on the right is just showing some folks deploying seeds with some, oh my God, I forgot what these are called. Help. Well, anyway, slinging them with these. Thank you, slingshots. And then this is just a table that show like the seed bombs that we made. So we made about over 7,000 seed bombs last year. So that was kind of exciting to get out there and do that. The road to recovery is definitely a work in progress. And, we really do need to work together to really come up with this plan that in order to successfully recover the McDowell Mountain. Obviously, researching the appropriate native species that were historically dominant of this area is important. And we've got that. We've started working on that already as a team. Researching planting strategies, definitely we're going to need to do that. Planting native seeds, whether we do it by sowing them by hand, just mixing them with some soil and compost and sowing them, or slinging them, which seems to be more fun for more people. So we're going to choose some experimental plots this year again. Soil crust experiments that Helen and is working on with McDowell Sonoran Conservancy. And then invasive species management. We need to work together to get some grants and other opportunities. But I just want to point out that this is like the McDowell's research here. This left one is the seed bomb plot from last year. And those seeds are almost entirely still together after all the rain we had, which is a little discerning because we planted so many of them. So hopefully they will break down and that seed is still viable when they do, because it ideally is protecting them. And I wanted you to notice the cacti planting that they did in the burn area. And the elephant in the room is that red brome and that schismus, and we have to do something about it. I know there's no way we can manage it all, but we have to do some triage and determine where it's most effective to do management, like where we're planting our saguaro, because the only way that we're going to recover these areas and these saguaros are going to survive is if we remove that invasive species fuel load. And so that's just one thing we really need to make sure we work on. It's not something that anybody's doing right now. Everyone's ignoring red brome and schismus because it's everywhere, but we're going to have to do something about it, even if it's just experimental areas and plots. So we're going to continue to collect native seed. And this is what I was kind of talking about, doing maybe a combo of sowing seed mix. We're going to mix some buckets with some native seed, some compost, and some clay, and just hand sow it together out of a bucket. I think we're definitely going to do some of that this year. We'll also do some seed bombs, and we're going to mix up the mix so it's a 3 to 1 to 1 ratio, where 3 is the soil component, and then 1 is the clay component, and 1 is 1 part seed, 1 part clay, 1 part compost, basically. So I think that I'd like to see some experiments done using those as well. And we'll probably do them here at one of our parks if I could find some volunteers. And then invasive species treatment is really going to play a huge role in whether we're going to be able to successfully. And I want to kind of say this, like the Cave Creek Complex fire, Tonto National Forest went out there and planted a ton of saguaro, and then a wildfire came by, 25 years later and wiped them all out. And I don't want to see that happen. I want our work to be super successful here at McDowell. So that's why I'm talking more about the red brome and the schismus, because we have to do something about it or our work is in vain, I feel like. So I just want to make sure we're talking about that, and that's in the conversation. We did have some really great outreach last year. Fox News and Channel 12 News did some really great reporting on the work that we were doing in the recovery plan that we have in place. And then StinkNet is really not here yet in high numbers, as you can see in this picture with Mary and Farshid and Debbie. But while we were walking out there doing the Saguaro transect monitoring, we saw small patches of it here and there, and it's coming in from the surrounding communities and on the horsebacks, and something we really need to work on. And I don't know the answer to this, so if you guys have some ideas, feel free to share them with us. But I don't know the best way to reach out to the community. Like they're large, like the community to the north. So if they're bringing that StinkNet in, like they're bringing in wildfire potential. And so we want to make them aware of that. So maybe they'll do some management. So that's something that also is going to be key to the success of restoring this region. So basically the next steps are we need to continue to work on and complete the Diamond Fire Recovery Plan. We need to include long-term maintenance of invasives, planting cacti trees, addition to native seed. We also need to continue to monitor the photo plots, the saguaro transects, the soil crust, the seed mounds. All of this is giving us really great information and is going to help this project to be more successful. And then invasive species management, I talk about that again because it's so important, but also cacti tree plantings. At the park's end, we have to do cultural clearance for any of the areas we do any planting. So that has to be planned out in advance. And then we should try to identify partners that can donate saguaro cacti and some trees to help with the recovery. And I did just want to say thank you to City of Scottsdale, the Parsons Field Institutes, McDowell Sonoran Conservancy volunteers, and the Desert Defenders. Like us all working together like this is showing me how successful a project could be, because we're all learning a little bit from one another. We all have, a different niche of expertise. And so it's really, really great. Oh, and NAU also, I should mention Helen's work. So us all working together is really going to help this project be successful. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Juanita. That was a great presentation. And up next, we have Dr. Helen Rowe, who is our Parsons Field Institute ecologist, and she's also a professor at Northern Arizona University. And she couldn't give her presentation in person today. She had something come up, so I have a recording of it. And then we'll see if she's available via phone after her presentation to be able to answer questions when we get to that part.
And NAU research professor, and I'm going to present on how well does cultivated biocrust establish in the field. Before I get started, I'd like to thank my collaborators, Dr. Anita Antoninka, Debbie Langenfeld, and Jane Brady. Debbie and Jane are citizen scientist leads for this project. And then we worked with Scottsdale Community College and the City of Scottsdale on this project. This is a drone photo taken from our cultivation phase of this project. And let's see. Before we get started, we should talk a little bit about what biological soil crusts are, or biocrusts. They are living organisms on the soil surface, and they consist of lichens, mosses, and cyanobacteria. They aggregate soil surfaces, which prevents erosion. They may reduce plant emergence or increase growth because of, comes next, nutrient cycling, carbon uptake, and storage. We had a two-phase project, and we've already presented before on the farm cultivation phase, but I'll be giving a little bit of a refresher on that, and the field experiments, which is what I'll be presenting on. We salvaged 200 buckets of biocrust from both Frey's field, but then mostly at the from before the Pima Dynamite trailhead went in. And we used some of this in the cultivation phase of our project. And so, this, we had 3 different treatments, environments. So this was what we called the quesadilla, where we had a layer of wheat, all of them had a layer of wheat cloth, jute or no jute in these squares, soil or native sand on top of the jute, and then biocrust at 20%. And those were cultivated in 3 different environments. So this is the quesadilla, where we laid shade cloth directly on top. This is at Scottsdale Community College. Or the hoop, where we had these hoops that raised the shade cloth over the top, and then we had this greenhouse study at the NAU greenhouse, and also had the shade cloth. And so just as a quick reminder of our cultivation results, we had greenhouse and quesadilla did the best. And the greenhouse grew more moss and had more chlorophyll A than the other treatments. Quesadilla grew more cyanobacteria. The plants did not grow very well in the greenhouse, and the native and non-native plants grew best in the quesadilla environment, and the native plants preferred the native soils and no jute. And they preferred similar conditions as the biocrust, except for the biocrust preferred the jute. So with that reminder of our cultivation phase, our next phase was to take these cultivated biocrust out into the field. This is our field site at Granite Mountain. And we had 3 experiments. In the first field experiment, we were asking the questions, what stability treatments work best for establishing cultivated biocrust in the field? And which cultivation treatments from the cultivation phase establish best? And how well does that compare with field salvage biocrust? And so we had our biocrust types were all the ones from the cultivation, plus we had a field salvage and a control with no biocrust. And we had our stability treatments were adding psyllium, adding the biocrust as pellets, and adding water with the biocrust when we added it to the fields. And so here's our results from that. We found that the cultivated and the field salvage all did better than the control until the final season, where the control caught up. And then in terms of the stability, the psyllium did way better in the first season, but then after that, it evened out and there weren't differences among the treatments. For our field experiments 2 and 3, that was a slightly different site here. And we asked the questions, can we transfer biocrust intact? So remove the jute with the biocrust from the cultivation phase to the fields versus crumbling the biocrust from the jute and then putting it on new jute in the field. And how well does biocrust colonize outside of the treated plots? And can we and should we seed together with biocrust inoculation? That was our experiment 3. And so we started with the 3 types of cultivation on jute. And then we either removed the biocrust from the jute, crumbled, and it applied it with or without jute, and or the intact with jute. And we had this with the different cultivation environments. And then some of them had the native soil or sand substrate still from the cultivations phase. And then we either seeded or didn't seed for the experiment 3 plots. So this is what we found. We found that in the first 2 seasons, the greenhouse cultivated biocrust did really well. But then later on, we found that it really decreased. So that was pretty interesting. We think maybe it wasn't as well adapted. Then in terms of colonizing outside of the plots, we found that the treatment didn't matter, but the biocrust outside the plots was related to the biocrust inside the plot. So the more biocrust inside the plots, the more biocrust in the outside in those last 2 years. So this, as the biocrust grew, this relationship strengthened over the course of the study. And for the field experiment 3, we found that similarly, the greenhouse cultivated biocrust did well with no biocrust addition, but that also depended on season. So you see here the greenhouse treatments did better than the controls over here. And that they continued to be strong. Sorry, I made myself big. How do I get this smaller out of the way? So, and then here we had no treatment differences. So the control started to increase over time. So then, and then again, from the inner plots to the outer plots, this was similarly to experiment 2. There was a relationship with the amount of biocrust to colonizing the outside of the plots that increased over time. So there was an interaction effect. And so finally, for our seed success, nothing really happened for the first couple seasons. And then we had 3 species established: Senna covesii, Bouteloua rockrothii, and Plantago ovata. And they did best in the plots that had less biocrust in them and with jute. So these are 2 jute ones, and those were better than the control. The intact plot was sort of in between, and so were the other ones without jute. So that was interesting. All right, and so to summarize, we have going back to our questions, we asked what stability treatments work best for establishing cultivated biocrust in the field. And we found that psyllium helped bind the biocrust to the soil and improved establishment, but really only in the first season. When we asked which cultivation treatments establish best and how does it compare to the field salvaged biocrust? Well, we found that cultivated biocrust performed as well as the field collected biocrusts, which is good news because remember what we're trying to do is collect the salvaged soils and bulk them up so that there's more biocrust to work with in restoration. And so we're finding that that was a successful strategy. We also found that while the greenhouse cultivated soils did best in cultivation and initially in the field, they seemed to decline after the first 2 seasons. So they might not be as well adapted. We don't know for sure. All right, and then we also asked, can we transfer biocrust intact from the cultivation phase to establishment? And it seemed like, yes, we could, but it didn't make a huge amount of difference. And you'll see in a bit, we're trying this in a couple different ways. And how well does biocrust colonize from treated plots? And we did see that it does appear to be colonizing well from the treated areas, depending on the amount of biocrust. And should we seed together with the biocrust inoculation? And we did find that seeding did well after a couple of years, and did best under the jute crumble and jute control, but not the jute intact. Now it's just going to tell you about what's happened since this experiment. We established a biocrust sod farm similar to the first one, but then we created longer sods that were 2 or 3 meters in length. We rolled them up, wetted them, and we rolled them up into these much larger sods. And we're testing those out as use of fire breaks in this setting here, post-fire, for keeping the plants reduced, hopefully the non-natives to act as fire breaks, and then also in eroded areas. So we place them over some eroded features, and we're seeing how well that keeps, helps slow down erosion. And so we are just early stages of that. And in the preserve, in the diamond fire, we put out different treatments. And in a 3x3 experiment in which we had applied seed, biocrust, and both in a full factorial with broadcast pellet and nothing for 9 levels. And I think we had 7 blocks. And we had these different treatments, and we went out and monitored in the spring. And for our early results, what we're finding is that there's good amount of biocrust colonization post-fire. And we're also seeing some early establishment of brittle bush and desert marigolds. And we found that we had put these ropes around these plots to sort of keep the pellets in place, and we're seeing that it's been a successful place for seed establishment alongside these ropes. So that was cool to see. And so that's the end of my presentation, and I will be in, we'll look forward to questions. Thank you very much.
Oh, this is Rob, and I'm going to come back on with some of the questions that have been placed in the group chat. One of them is just a little bit more about the seed bombs. Juanita and Mary, you both talked about them. You used a formula that was a standard in your first deployment, and some of those have dissolved and some of them are still intact. Juanita mentioned maybe we want to try a different mix in the coming season. But one of the questions is, okay, what seeds are in the seed bombs, Mary? What plants are in there?
I'll let Juanita take that because this was she had a couple different mixes. She had a pollinator mix, a pioneer mix, and then a mix of Plantago, I believe, and maybe one other species. So there was quite a few things in the mixes, but it was because your teams had gone out and collected quite a bit. So I'll let you kind of follow up with that.
We probably had about 44 different species in the seed bombs, but we did split them up into pollinator seed balls, what I call pioneer, which would be like plants that come in really fast, like brittlebush or sage. And then we had annual seed bombs separate, and then we had ones that had Plantago and purple threon, and we split them up that way because there was some talk, no real science, but some talk of people recognizing that in areas where there was a lot of purple threon or Plantago species, they didn't see much stink net. And so we split those out for that reason, just to see if we'd see anything like that.
And then Helen just touched a minute ago on some of the seedlings that are observed. Which ones seem to be working? Juanita.
Rob, can you repeat that again? What was the question?
So Helen mentioned in her last slide that, you know, she's getting some sprouting on those plots. What of those different seed ball mixtures, what seemed to be working?
I think were those in the pioneer mix, Juanita? The brittlebush was in the pioneer, and then the thalia, what was that one in? Was the desert miracle?
That was in the pollinator mix.
Pollinator, yeah. So one of each, actually.
I guess I should tell you there's a couple species that you might recognize to answer the first question. So we had a lot of pollinator species like American threefold, spiny goldenweed, desert marigold, desert senna. Like those were like the pollinator species, desert globe mallow. And then the pioneer species was mostly fur sage and brittlebush, but there was some globe mallow and then some other species that accidentally got mixed in there as well.
Okay, another question. And again, this will be for Mary and Juanita if Helen's not on. And it's the intersection. Oh, there she is. I saw her wave. Okay. This is the intersection of two different projects, invasive plant control and soil crust. So Juanita mentioned, you know, we don't have an answer for red brome today, but that's pretty high on the list, and stink net's right behind it. If the answer to that is spraying, for example, large area spraying, the question is unintentional consequences if that spray is non-selective on things like soil crust, which you're trying not to kill.
So I'd be happy to answer that. I can't respond about what its effects are on soil crust, but I can answer that there's a product on the market called Indaziflan that was designed for annual grasses, and it's effective on it's a pre-emergent. So it doesn't actually kill plants that are growing and alive. It prevents and kills seed from germinating, basically. And specifically, it was designed for annual grasses like red brome and schismus. But it happens to be very effective on stink net. Now, it may affect some of our native annuals. They're finding that it lasts up to 3 years in the soil. So it can prevent stink net, schismus, and Mediterranean grass from germinating for 3 years. And schismus, or the Mediterranean grass, and the red brome only have viability of 3 years. So you could wipe those out of those areas, at least temporarily. And then for the stink net, it has a lifespan of 5 years, but the majority of those seeds will try to germinate as soon as we get above average winter precipitation. So they'll be affected in those first 3 years. It'll knock it back quite a bit. So the idea would be long-term management. We don't know. I couldn't answer if it has any effect at all on soil biocrust. I don't know that the answer's out there. Maybe Helen can shed some light on that. I don't know.
Helen?
So there's some early studies that are showing that there's some herbicides are safe on BioCrust, and we actually just got some funding from SRP to do some studies on just that question of stink net control with BioCrusts. So we'll be doing that next year with my NAU colleagues. But we'll be doing it at the SCC site, where there's plenty of stink net. And so we're going to do a pre-emergent and a post-emergent. So I think that segues well into Juanita's comments about the plants. I guess the other thing I would add about the plants is that people are thinking about it in, areas, maybe selective areas, because if it's not selective, so maybe along roadsides and places where you really don't want, native or non-native, you just don't want the fire risk in some places. So those are good sort of strategies.
I would even add to that. So I talked about triage because that's kind of what we do for all our invasive species management at this point. And the idea would be to select areas where you want to establish maybe a fire break, areas where you're planting saguaro and you don't want those invasive species to affect the long-term survivability of that saguaro. We would do some form of triage like that. Right now, what we do is like 50 to 100 feet on each trail edge or wash edge or roadway edge. And that's kind of our common standard practice for now, because that's the triage that we've set for all of our invasive species management. That doesn't mean we don't go outside of that to treat it, but that's our main focus. And the idea is to, one, prevent the vector of movement of those invasive species, to create a defensible space for firefighters when they have to fight wildfires, and then to prevent wildfires from starting. So it kind of does three things at once. And this indaziflan, I've been using it at Spur Cross and Cave Creek, and we're finding it so effective on stinknet, redworm, and schistnus. And I'm still getting native species, native annuals coming in those areas. So it may affect some of that from germinating, but some of it's still germinating in those areas. So I saw lupines, some popcorn flower, like several other and native annuals that were coming back in those areas right away. But the research that John Brock did at Arizona Game and Fish, he was stating in his presentation that he gave at the Southwest Vegetation Management Association conference is that he basically said that those natives are used to going dormant for long periods of time because of drought. And so they won't be as affected as the invasive plants will, because they're going to try to germinate that first year they get that winter precipitation. So the idea would be we'd also add annual seeds. That's one of the reasons why I had the annual seed bomb separate. And I don't know if this is true, but according to the folks that do the research for the seed bombs, they state that if you add charcoal to it, it will protect those seeds from herbicides. So we'll try that as well.
That's very encouraging to hear that there's hope. Because sometimes you look at these fields of stinknet and you just think, just shoot me. I can't deal with it. But there are
I'll just tell you, go to Cave Creek Regional Park. Go to Cave Creek Regional Park and check it out, because we've had the National Park Service out there. They haven't treated the whole park, but it was all stinknet last year, and it's much less stinknet this year because they did 3 treatments in 3 different areas with that indaziflan. Super effective.
Excellent. I don't see.
Yes, Jonathan.
Yeah, I don't see another question. So, but at this point, I'd like to hand off to Doug. And let's get the panel pinned up on the board here.
I got myself unmuted. When the panel was first conceived, we were interested in highlighting things that people could do to deal on a personal basis with the impact potentially of heat and fire. And we realized that among our 9 Steward Conservancy programs, there are already many things being done that can serve as a template for things that could be done outside the preserve. And so we have assembled a panel of stewards from 5 programs, not from the citizen science program, but from 5 other programs where they are really focused on dealing in very practical ways with the threat from fire and heat. So from the construction and maintenance program, we have Jeff McFarland, who is the assistant chair of that program. From the patrol program, we have Gretchen Barilak, who is the chair. We have Robbie Fowler, the assistant chair of the Steward Education Program. Gina Clark, who is the chair of community engagement. And finally, we're going to hear from Annie Johnson, who is the education coordinator for the Conservancy, and she will represent the youth education program. So we have asked these leads and assistant leads to tell us something about their programs, because we know there are people who are attending this symposium who are not that familiar with what we do in the Conservancy. And then after they have explained something about what their programs are about, then to tell us what they're doing in the realm of heat and fire and the apparent impact that these interventions are having. So we'll start out with construction and maintenance and Jeff McFarland. And I'll just premise this by saying I've spent many productive hours out in the preserve as a citizen scientist working shoulder to shoulder with construction and maintenance colleagues. So Jeff, you can take it away on behalf of construction and maintenance.
Great, Doug. Thank you very much. Yeah, and we have a lot of folks who are participating in construction and maintenance who also are very active in all the other programs, in particular, including citizen science. But so thank you for letting CNM be part of the panel. And Mary, thank you for the really cool CNM logo on your slide. It looked great. I think we might have to do patches on our shirts. But so let me tell people who are less familiar with CNM a little quick introduction of what we do. CNM was one of the original 3 programs of the Conservancy where we said, hey, we'll patrol the trails, we're going to greet at the trailhead, and we're going to help maintain the trails. Last year, we had 2,239 hours of donated time to CNM. Our mission statement is to maintain and support the trail system of McDowell, maintain and support the trail system of McDowell Storm Preserve for hikers, bikers, and equestrians to safely engage with the preserve. There's 35,000 acres of preserve, 225 miles of trails, provide access to this acreage. Of course, these trails aren't natural, they were man-made. They weren't made randomly, they were carefully planned, designed, built. In large part, this forethought and design has enabled us to have some of the best maintained trails in the county. We get a lot of compliments on the maintenance and the beauty of the preserve. The trails do have a nemesis. Water, plant growth, and visitor usage are constant forces trying to reclaim the trail. So in construction and maintenance, we work with the City of Scottsdale's natural resource coordinators. We plan routine maintenance, biannual routine maintenance for the major trails, would be trimming and deberming. We also have biannual maintenance for all trailheads, including the parking lot areas. We also do coordinated special projects, working with citizen science, for example, on some projects, or also as requested by the city. In large part, what we do is respond to problems and issues as they arise, storms, ruts, overgrowth, and these are often identified by our steward patrollers in our trail maintenance reports. So CNM is organized with 9 different area leads overseeing 9 different regions of the preserve. We also have some leadership roles in crew chiefs where we're trained in CM practices to lead the projects. How we see ourselves fitting into this discussion or into how we handle problems in the preserve. Our science programs tend to explore what and why. I guess CM is a little more engineering, a little more logistics and operational focused. we tend to focus on how to. So we do small group project management. We are trained for working with the preserve ecosystem, and we know all the key codes for the tool sheds. There you go. Some of the great projects we got to work with this year, you saw a lot of those in earlier presentations, and it was really an honor and a lot of fun to work on these projects. We got to help the city and Citizen Science were rescuing and relocating cactus from the park that was being built for the city. And we got to help plant over 1,000 gallons of cholla balls in the fire restoration area. So that was a lot of fun. As you would imagine, we use kitchen tongs to carefully place each ball. But I guess we can all say with honor, you know, everyone shed some blood for the preserve that day. So it was but it was a great project. We also got to assist with the planning of the saguaros. We were the team that got to help build the cages, and you could just see how professionally that was organized. It was just a real treat to work on that project. These cages are beautiful. We cut rebarb, we camoed the cages, everything built to just a perfect production. It was a lot of fun. It went real well. We also got to help with helicopter drops of tools and water for the invasive species fight. That project actually was one of my first CNM projects and kind of what got me interested in getting more and more involved with CNM. And we also have many stink net poles as we talk about stink net. So I know stink net very well from the on your knees standpoint. So we had manual pulls of stink net, not as many this year, but the year before, along a lot of the trailhead areas and the major trails. Kind of towards that is our thoughts forward for, you know, what can we do and how are we trying to help? You know, the trails and the trailheads in particular are the interface points between the preserve and the users. And so, you know, that kind of gives us at least a focus. In our stink net fight, that was our focus. We said, hey, if we could stop it at the trail, at the trailhead, if we could stop it as a, you know, in the slight perimeters on the trails, that was at least a place to start. We also work hard to keep the trail system and routes and trail widths to kind of follow their original design. In other words, we try to prevent a trail from widening as people try to walk around a bush that wasn't trimmed, or we try to prevent social trails, or a rut that has caused people to take a different route. So, and you know, once again, another thing we can do is keep people on the trail and keep the trail as designed and intended. Another point I wanted to make, I had in my notes here, was that although our focus has often been recreational use cases, these trail system is also how our citizen scientists are moving throughout this preserve. You know, it's how we're gaining access to everything we do in the preserve. So, you know, as we think forward going, what else can these trails be used for? What are some other ways to use them? I don't know if they could even play some role in being fire breaks, or access points, but you know, those are kind of thoughts that we're exploring. And toward that, when you think about the trail, we've thought about the tread, and maybe now we're kind of expanding to say, well, let's think about the trail corridor, which would, you know, maybe be, I don't know, 4 feet, 3 feet, 10 feet on either side of the trail. So just some more things to think about as we look at what we do for CNM.
Well, thanks for that report. And we really appreciate your work. And I think one takeaway from this is that we can all physically pull invasives that show up in our private spaces. And I know in my neighborhood, the globe chamomile is really moving in, but fortunately the homeowners are very good about removing it from their individual residential sites. So Gretchen, patrol, you are the eyes of the preserve. You know what's going on out there, and you do a great deal relating particularly to the potential impact of fire in the preserve. So tell us a little about your program.
Sure, thanks, Doug. So when we say patrol, what do we really mean? And, you know, in its simplest form, when we patrol, we go out on the trails. We have people who go out to hike. They might be doing their patrolling on their bike. And we also have several equestrian patrollers as well. And it's what's great about it is that our patrollers can choose when do they want to go out. As long as a preserve is open, they can decide what time of day they want to go and also for how long. And so we have just under 400, or excuse me, just under 500 people who are out there monitoring the 225 miles of trails that we have in the preserve. When I looked at just last year, we had 22,250 hours of patrol time spent on the various trails in the preserve, which is tremendous. On any given day, now that it's a little bit warmer out, it's more like 10 to 15 people a day that we have out. And in the busy seasons, we have 40 to 45 plus people out on the trails every single day. And one of the things that we started this year is we have what we're calling area leads, where we've divided up the preserve, and we have specific leads who really manage a particular section of the preserve. And so they're very familiar with all the trails there. And then they're also making sure that the various trails are patrolled throughout the overall season. After somebody does go through it and do a patrol, they'll go through and they'll fill out a report. They're always looking for, obviously their main thing is they're out there for our visitors, making sure they have what they need, providing directions, guidance, education. But the other thing is that they're looking for invasives. They're also looking to make sure that the trails are in good shape. And after they've finished their patrol, they'll go through and fill out a report through our Better Impact system. Very quick and easy to do. They can attach photos. If they see something out on the trail, maybe you might have a saguaro down, which is when Jeff's team will work with the city to take care of what needs to happen on the trail. But it's a very, very effective way for us to really get real-time information on what is happening out on the trails. And then it's the trail maintenance reports, like Jeff had mentioned, do go to the city as well to determine what the next action is going to be. And so we're not engaging with visitors about general questions or directions. We do actually come across a few things that are fire prevention related. And unfortunately, we do have some people who go out and they do smoke in the preserve. It doesn't happen very often. But when it does, we make sure that we have a zero tolerance policy. And if someone does not comply, we make sure that we call the non-emergency police number so that we can get somebody to address the situation. We talked a lot about invasives throughout this afternoon. What our patrollers do is go out and they will, if they're out on a particular patrol and they see a stink net in a particular area, they will go through and put that information into their report, which will then be funneled through the channels to make sure that the invasive gets taken care of. Mostly the globe chamomile, the stink net, like we've been talking about, is one of the great big ones that we've had issues with. The other one of the main activities that we do in our patrol program is the fire watch. Some people may be very familiar with it. It is done every year on the 4th of July. The 4th of July is the one day of the year where the preserve closes early. The preserve closes at noon. And then what we do is we have stewards who are at the various trailheads, as well as some key stepovers, so places where people can go into the preserve just by going, stepping over one of the bars, where people tend to go into the preserve, some of the key ones. We'll have stewards there from 6 until 9 at night. And what they're doing is educating people who want to get into the preserve to let them know that it's closed. And then just really monitoring to make sure that there aren't any issues, that people aren't going through and setting off fireworks. We go through and we do a Zoom call ahead of time every year to explain what the stewards need to make sure that they're doing, and a reminder of the specific protocols that they need to follow in the event that something does happen out in the preserve. We typically have 35 to 40 stewards who are staffing 14 different locations throughout the preserve. And I do want to just take a couple of quick minutes just to talk about what the fire preserve or the protocol is for reporting a fire within the preserve. And this is information that we go through with our stewards. Clearly, personal safety is the main thing. So that if somebody does go through and see a fire, they think they might see a fire, we ask them to call 911 right away. After making sure that they're in a very safe location. The city of Scottsdale, we emphasize with our stewards is that even if they think they're not quite sure, it's so important just to call. It's better to have a team of the fire department on their way out to check to see if it is an issue, and then for us to realize, nope, not an issue, and to have them go through and come back. Every second counts, and particularly as we've seen with these most recent fires that we've had, seconds are critical. And then so as part of the call to 911, reporting obviously general information about their name, where they are, what they're seeing. Are they seeing flames? Is it just smoke? Is the smoke going up? Is it going to the side? The dispatchers will be going through and asking them specific questions about what they're actually experiencing. How big is the fire? What direction is the fire going in? And any kind of, is it windy out? What direction is the wind coming from? As much information that we have, we make sure that we're going through and giving the 911 dispatcher. And one of the reminders that I thought was really helpful in the event us personally are being impacted by a fire, is that the most dangerous place to be in a fire is either downwind or uphill. So if you are in a situation where the wind is blowing from you toward the fire, then turn around and then go back the other way so that you're escaping where the fire is coming. And then vice versa, if the wind is blowing from the fire toward you, then you go through and just run perpendicular to where the fire is going. Avoid deep canyons, of course, and anywhere there's some really deep, thick vegetation. This is all an ideal world. Obviously, there's some situations that people just need to do the best that they can in the event that they have had to come across a specific fire in the preserve or anywhere else. And the fire watch is one of the really key critical program activities that we have every year through the patrol program. And we're coming up very soon. We're in preparation for it right now. We've met with the city once, and we're in communication with them as we're getting ready for the fire watch on July 4th. The only other thing, it's not specifically heat and fire related. The other thing that we do as a patrol program every year, actually we're going to be doing it twice this year, is our Share the Trails Day, where we are at the main trailheads throughout the preserve, educating our visitors on sharing the trails. The trails are for hikers, they're for bikers, they're also for people who want to bring their horses in to ride on the trails. And so just a real quick reminder to visitors about making sure that they know who has the right of way, and that we're all out there to really enjoy the beauty of the preserve. And that is what we do in patrol.
Well, thank you very much, Gretchen. And I can't think of anything more important than properly reporting a fire. Thank you for those tips. We're going to move on to education. And Robbie is with our Steward Education Program, and they do some education that relates to fire and heat in the preserve. What can you tell us about that, Robbie?
Okay. Steward's Education's mandate is that we empower steward volunteers with the knowledge, skills, and confidence for excellence in stewardship. And what that boils down to is that in every training, workshop, educational offering that education offers, we overlap with all the other people that you'll see on this panel, but we also overlap with a lot of other programs that go on within citizen science, and everything is aimed at preserving with the idea of heat and fire, the preserve. The education team works with the Conservancy program staff and the Sonoran Education Center to provide a range of offerings for stewards. We've developed several 101 orientations or starter classes on topics, and have in the last year branched out into 201 and even 301 offerings that are in the works. Educational offerings are offered in person and online. They're online videos and through specialized trainings designed to go out into the field or stay in the classroom. We train on flora, fauna, geology, human history, any area you can think of that we can offer a broader base for being a steward. We try and teach it, and everything has in mind that we are preserving the preserve for everyone else. One of those things is invasive species, and we all have areas where patrol and C&M and deal with invasive species. But the fire regime in the desert is, to forgive the pun, a hot topic, and we all do something to do with that. And the thing is that then there's desert safety and first aid. One of the steward's most important roles is keeping visitors safe in the preserve, which means protecting them and informing them and educating them on what to do with invasive species if they see them and can identify them, because most of them cannot, but also what to do with fire and heat, lack of water, all the things that the trailhead ambassadors, another place we overlap, stop them at the trailheads and ask them, do you have water? Do you have a hat? Do you have sunscreen? All these things go into mitigating heat and fire. One of the things that the steward's important role is to keep visitors safe, as I said, and in Arizona that means coping with fire and heat. This is a rescue blanket. You see it? Okay. Just a piece of Mylar. And if you're in patrol or if you're in education, you're taught what to keep in your pack. And one of the things is a solar blanket. And in the safety and desert first aid class, they teach you that if you see a downed hiker, first you put the Mylar blanket below them. And that is to keep them off the rocks, which can actually burn right through their skin. I've seen horrific pictures of people who have been burned badly because of laying on a rock when they fell or laying on a rock when they've been unconscious. This blanket can also be wrapped over them or tented over them to protect them from the sun until rescue arrives. The thing is that this little piece you wouldn't think would be as pivotal, but there is, I can't remember where the man is from, North Carolina, I believe, that was hiking last year in the preserve, and he is still undergoing lots and lots of rehab and operations to take care of the musculature that was burned away when he fell on a rock and was unconscious. So we do everything we can to educate people and to protect them. So what's in your pack, it goes beyond the water, it goes beyond the cooling towel or wrap to the emergency space blanket, and also the contact numbers and the non-emergency numbers to be able to take care of the things that Gretchen already talked about. We also do lunch and learns. Lunch and learns have covered lots of different fire and burn related mitigation topics in the past. Fire mitigation by David Ramirez was, I think he was from the Tonto Ranger section, and then the effects of fire on Arizona upland community by the deputy director of the Desert Seed Resource Center. And as the temperatures become hotter, I just looked on Steward World today. it warns, the very first thing on the page, it warns that we are facing wildfire in the preserve because of the heat and the lack of moisture. The city of Scottsdale has raised its fire risk notices to extreme, and we warn people about the fire dangers. In addition, they provide us with the 9/11 protocol that we follow when we're in the preserve and we see that there's a possibility that a fire has started. And we don't wait to make sure, we call if there's a possibility. As Gretchen mentioned already, the timing is of the essence. But personal safety, we stress in education, is first and foremost, as they do in patrol and in CNM. This is the essence, and every second counts. And every wildfire situation is dynamic and different. We can't teach the public how to deal with the fires, but we can teach them the protocol and the stewards to take care of the emergency situation to help evacuate and safeguard visitors. And also a list of things that when you call the dispatcher, you know what to tell them to be able to pinpoint where you are, where people are, and how to get them out. The other thing I'd like to bring up is Firewise, not Firewatch. Gretchen already covered Firewatch. Firewise is a program that encourages communities to create conditions that reduce wildfire intensity to help prevent home ignitions. It is a program actually of the National Fire Protection Agency, NFPA, not the preserve itself, and it's administered locally by the assistance of the Scottsdale Fire Department and partnership with the Arizona Department of Forestry and Fire Management. The idea is to create dispensable space around a home's exterior to remove invasive plants, ladder fuels, low-hanging branches, and dead plants to allow firefighters access to keep wildfires at bay. Per the NFPA, a community must create a Firewise committee or a board. They must complete a fire hazard assessment, create and submit a Firewise plan, hold an annual Firewise event, and make a minimum investment per household in local wildfire mitigation. Not anything beyond going out and assessing your own property and the green spaces and washes around your property and what can be done to mitigate fire as it travels across invasive species and brush and debris that have collected. More than 1,900 communities across the country are now taking steps to reduce their wildfire risk at Firewise sites. Scottsdale, which is where the preserve is, currently has 19 communities that are Firewise sites, including approximately 20 to 30 more that have begun the process and have indicated interest. Many of these communities have the preserve as its wildland urban interface, meaning they butt up against the fences or property lines of the preserve. And therefore, if their property is at risk, the preserve is at risk, and vice versa. These communities have the preserve as its wildfire urban interface, as I said, and this program helps to protect communities from wildfire that starts in the preserve or starts outside the preserve. In 2023, 5 communities became Firewise sites within Scottsdale. I don't have to name them, but also 30 villages are in the process of becoming a site. Within 14 villages have been assessed so far. The McDowell Sonoran Conservancy Firewise team in February 2021, the Conservancy and the Scottsdale Fire Department agreed to work together in the process of helping communities who wanted to become Firewise sites. A team was assembled, and in November 2022, 6 individuals were trained in Firewise principles and earned their certifications. Now, I go over these things because what I was keeping in mind is for the people who aren't in and around the preserve, what is it that you can do to mitigate fire and heat? Well, Firewise is all the way across the United States. We have a little bit of a different situation because of the Sonoran Desert, but it is a situation where anyone in the United States can work to mitigate fire along their property lines. The Crust Norte was our first official assessment in March 2022. As of this time, we've performed 22 assessments in a variety of communities around Scottsdale. Today, we have 10 team members who have helped perform assessments. When we perform an assessment, we'll walk the perimeter of the community or village. We will also walk washes that run through the interior of these communities to inspect all areas where there's a WUI. Our job using Solo Locator is to document that the FireWise requirements have been met by the homeowners or HOA. We also interact with homeowners to discuss FireWise activities as well as to promote the Conservancy. Depending on what stage of FireWise qualification the community is in, we document phase 1 and 2 and report back first to the Scottsdale Fire Department, and they go on to document it with FireWise USA. FireWise requirements are that the desert environment that we live in is somewhat unique in its WUI standpoint, the wildlife urban interface. The coniferous and deciduous trees, forests that we think of when we think about forest fires do not exist here. Instead, we are faced with smaller trees, a lot of brush, grasses, and invasive plants. Scottsdale Fire Department and FireWise USA uses a hybrid format of their FireWise certification here. If you're interested in FireWise for your community or WUI, look online for FireWise USA or the FireWise Band Together program. The phase 1 of FireWise is the immediate zone, which is 5 feet from your backyard wall or house structure. You remove vegetation down to bare earth. Some native species such as saguaros, barrel cactus, ocotillo, and native trees are allowed to stay. Trees must be trimmed up to 6 feet to prevent canopy from catching fire. Immediate zone is intended to help stop the fire. It also gives the fire personnel a pathway to pursue the fire, but also an escape route if necessary. Phase 2 is the extended zone, 5 to 20 feet from the backyard wall or house structure. So you remove all invasive species from that area. Native plants are thinned to create spacing between them. Remove all dead and dying vegetation. Trees are trimmed up to 6 feet to prevent the canopies from catching fire, and the extended zone is intended to slow the fire down and keep ground fire from using ladder fuels to reach the canopy. Firefighters will have an easier time controlling a wildfire if it stays on the ground and has been slowed down by the removal of invasives and the thinning out of native plants. Once a wildfire gets into the tree canopy, the danger of embers finding their way into eaves and vents on households or other structures increases significantly. This is the main cause of home ignition. And we are very, very active in and around our communities along the entire perimeter of the preserve, but also into Scottsdale at large to keep wildfires at bay and to be as safe as possible in mitigating them even when they start. And I am not by any means an expert on the FireWise program. The person to get in touch with, if you are within the Steward program and know him, is Steve Coluccio. Thank you.
All right, Robbie, thank you very much. That's good information. So as far as education goes, we have a community engagement program that Gina is going to tell us about, and they're very involved in helping the public to understand about some of these risks as well.
Thanks, Doug. So I'm the chair of community engagement. We're a relatively newer program in the Conservancy, and our role is to provide outreach into the local community, and we do that in a number of ways. One of the ways is that we do lectures at Scottsdale Public Libraries. We are part of the Osher Lifelong Learning Program with ASU. And we also have a program where we go out to community groups and to HOAs and educate them about a myriad of topics. But one of the examples that I want to use is our partnership with citizen science and our collaboration. All of the lectures that we provide and our speakers provide are fact-based. So we're rooted in science in many ways. And so as part of our Community Connections HOA program, we will go out to an HOA and offer them several different types of activities. One of them could be a lecture, another could be more hands-on in the preserve. And so one of the collaborations with citizen science is actually bringing in some of our staff members and our citizen scientists to talk to communities about what they can do to help control invasives, what they can do to protect their properties from fire, and the work that we're doing in the preserve to really, with our partners, to restore lands. Now, when you go into an HOA, you don't know what level the audience is actually at. So you may have to describe invasives in quite a bit of detail. They could confuse brittlebush with stinkneck because they don't know. And so when we go in, we are trying to gauge the audience in advance so that we present the appropriate information. So we talk about why should we care about invasives? And you heard quite a bit of this from Mary, who does the best job possible. So I'm not going to go into any of those details, but we use that information to educate the public on why invasives need to be controlled and the actions that communities can take. We also, as Robbie described, are partnering with the Scottsdale Fire Department. We just had Captain Hunter do a lecture at the Mustang Library. And we use those materials within our HOA program as well. Fire is an important theme for us, and the communities that we talk to, and there are 30 to 50 communities that actually are around the preserve, they're worried about fire. It isn't a situation where they feel like they don't have to listen to us. They actually want the information. And in fact, they love for us to be very proactive with their boards and help them get rid of invasives in the community, help them understand how to protect their environment by using FireWise principles. And when we showed them the work that we have done with our partners in the preserve, being able to map invasives, being able to test different types of treatments, and then looking forward to the restoration work that's going on now, whether it's actually planting saguaros or seed balls, they are really amazed because they're unaware of so much activity that's going on around them. And what you see is this real enthusiasm for how can I support this work? What can I do in my own community? And that's really our goal in community engagement, is to engage the public, but also to get them to take action. And so it's really important for us to be able to describe the action that our partners and the Conservancy takes to look at issues like invasives and fire. The other area that we talk to them about is biodiversity. And you heard Jessie's presentation about and Rob's talk about tortoises and what happens when a corridor gets blocked off. And one of the messages that we bring into communities is let wildlife be. Don't feed wildlife. Don't take them in as pets unless you're allowed to. So there is a desert tortoise program that allows that. But helping the community understand some of the things that they should do and some of the things that maybe they shouldn't do. And so some of the classes that we do, And when I say we, by the way, I'm actually talking about a lot of people in the Conservancy that are coming out of the education program or in our Pathfinders organization, and some of our staff as well, that we collaborate well with. And so when, when we go in and talk to the communities, there might be basic presentations about flora and fauna. The life cycle of the saguaro, for example, is one of our popular talks. Nature is Therapy, where we talk about plants and the medicinal purposes behind those plants. So our offerings are fairly broad and are really meant to inspire the community to support the Conservancy and the work of our partners, and to help them understand how they can take action to preserve and advance natural open space wherever they are. So with that, I'm going to leave it because I know this has been a long, terrific session, and I think we have one more panel member to get to. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gina. Yes, Annie is going to tell us about our youth education program, which is really important and a wonderful initiative. So Annie, what can you tell us? You're muted right now, Annie.
I sure am, sorry. Okay. In youth education, our goal is to empower today's youth to take positive actions in the long-term conservation of the Sonoran Desert. And so we provide standards-based interactive learning experiences in both the classroom and the preserve. And in those, we highlight both the preserve as well as the Conservancy science, while we also try to promote an appreciation of the Sonoran Desert and our natural open spaces. So in Arizona, 4th grade is actually where they cover things like natural disasters and weather patterns. So that's primarily where we talk to elementary students about wildfire mitigation and heat. During our 4th grade field trips in the preserve, we conduct a heat study. And in that, the students are given an infrared thermometer, and they kind of wander around and take and record temperatures for things like concrete, metal, dirt. And then they head over and do it for plants in the shade, things like that. And it helps them to demonstrate the urban heat island effect in a way that they can understand at a 4th grade level. And how natural spaces without those large amounts of concrete and metal might be cooler than our nearby urban areas where they live. In the classroom, one of our best tools to educate elementary students regarding invasive species in fire is our buffalo grass botany activity, which many of you have probably seen. In this lesson, we discuss buffalo grass, how we find it in the preserve, how it's an invasive species that can have detrimental effects on our natural desert environment. We talk about how quickly it spreads and how it outcompetes native plants for resources. We show large swaths of dried buffalo grass in pictures in the desert and discuss how they can see it covers so much ground. It connects the plants to one another. We talked about this earlier in one of the presentations, but that leads to increased wildfires. We also talked to them about how those fires burn hotter and longer than they would if there weren't invasive grasses like buffalo grass fueling them. And at the end, we have a large felt hiking shoe and a large felt dog, and they're given Velcro buffalo grass seeds, and they are able to toss that in order to demonstrate how buffalo grass is able to stick to our pants, our shoes, dog's fur. And the takeaway we're hoping that they take home with them and tell their parents about is that we need to stay on trails when we go hiking. We need to keep our dogs on leash when we go hiking. And that way we won't be walking through buffalo grass. We won't be spreading buffalo grass. And then lastly, we have our Living Labs high school program, which Mary already talked about a lot. I'm just going to kind of mention a few of their projects again, but that is probably the youth education space where we deal with these topics the most. Through our partnership with Saguaro High School, students learned about experimental design, fieldwork, and monitoring as part of the Saguaro Nurse Experiment. As Mary previously mentioned, this was originally designed to be paired with a sister site at Fraysfield, but after the diamond fire broke out in 2023, it made sense to reintroduce saguaros into the post-burn area instead. And then, so working in youth education often requires that we be pretty fluid. Sometimes we need to shift priorities quickly. So post-fire, the focus had to shift from what happens when a wildfire travels through the desert instead to what humans can do to help restore the desert after wildfire. So that's what the kids were kind of focusing on with their experiments. Students studied post-fire restoration and learned to make seed balls that we talked about earlier, that they could distribute themselves in the burn area in the hopes of supporting new plant growth. Students removed invasive fountain grass from their school and replaced it with a pollinator garden. They created that BioCrust experiment that we heard about. They helped to plant native species in parts of the Diamond Fire burn area. And at our Expedition Days weekend, we already talked about this, but they had their own table where they were able to talk to local families about what they do, about seed balls, and about restoration in the preserve. So yeah, we're hoping that through these positive, interactive, hopefully fun experiences with kids, we can inspire future conservationists to take action and to address the issues that we discuss with them. And that includes mitigating the worsening wildfires and climate change that we're already facing. And that's all I got.
Great. Well, that's great, Annie. Thank you so much. Thank you to the members of the panel for a report on your activities and giving us a lot of good ideas. And I think we're going to skip questions in the interest of time, and I'll throw this back to Melanie to wrap things up.
That was incredibly informative. It really strikes me how the Steward programs are so interwoven together and build on each other. I think that's really incredible. So the road ahead, you've heard a lot of really good presentations about the work that we've completed this year. And so that always leads to the question, what's next? You all saw the Ecological Resource Plan 1.0, which we developed with the City of Scottsdale and partners in 2015. The City of Scottsdale is now updating. They've hired a consultant to update the Ecological Resource Plan since it's been almost a decade. And that's a wonderful thing. We've got a completely fresh set of eyes on it. We've got completely new information. And so we certainly have some ideas of what we want to do moving forward, but we also want to make sure that they are in alignment with the needs of the preserves. And then of course we always have evolving questions and environmental management needs that change as we get more information. But what I can say is that we do have some really fun and interesting paths forward for each of our projects. So for phenology, there we go. For phenology, we have, we're hoping to start an analysis of the data for the Saguaro now that we have quite a few years under our belt. For birds, we're going to be really solidifying that list of sensitive species and toying with the idea of shifting from transects to point counts. The timing is still a little up in the air, but we know that that would allow us to more perfectly link with a lot of the regional data, which is so important to us. With butterflies, we have a really good sense of what's going on with, diversity, abundance, and things like that on a regional scale or a macro scale. But we want to know what individual species are doing now and what some of our sensitive species are. So that's a direction that we're going to go in the next year with butterflies. With arthropods, and again, this is another thing that's open to timing, but we are looking forward to a slight shift in protocol that will help answer a new question. The old question was, are there differences between the edges, that wildland interface area that Robbie talked about, and the interior of the preserve? Essentially, is there a human impact there? The new question is, what about the trails? So that will be a really interesting new phase of it. With bats, the big news is that Jessie is going to get certified to handle bats. That's going to be starting this week. And so we'll be able to bring a lot of the skills in-house, allowing us to test more consistently for white nose syndrome and do health checks and things like that. And we're going to continue working with our remote equipment that helps us stay a little farther away from the bats on a more frequent basis. With the IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature, has been quietly ticking away up at Northern Arizona University under the direction of Helen Rowe, and they have currently assessed 208 of the species that live in the preserve, so our plant species, 208 different plant species, to see if they are endangered, threatened, or sensitive. That means that we have a little over 100 more to go. Not all of the plants are eligible for investigation here, like some of them are invasive and things like that. But of the eligible plants, we're really getting there. And after that's done, we're going to have a really good sense of whether we have any really sensitive plant species on the preserve, and then we can manage them. Invasive species, we're going to keep working at that 3,000 plus acres, continue working with the city of Scottsdale and testing various methods of treating stink net. And we also are going to continue working with Intel Corporation to scale up the AI with the hope of being able to use it to look at aerial photos, not necessarily through drones, but aerial photos. And by doing that, survey that last 7,000 plus acres that we haven't surveyed. Wildlife cameras, a lot of this is business as usual. This was the big year for getting everything up and running, and now we just got to run it. So, but the new thing is an analysis of what's going on in the culverts near Dynamite Rio Verde Road. And that will give us some really good information of what animals are or are not crossing from north to south or south to north using the culverts. Very good information. Tortoises, will continue collecting and analyzing data and sharing the data with our partners, Arizona Game and Fish Department, and working with our partners on to develop a long-term plan and protocols. Oh, there we go. It didn't want to change. All right, with restoration, as you can tell from all the presentations, we have a lot going on. And we're really going to move this year into a phase of boots on the ground restoration. We've got the experiment in the ground, and now we're shifting over to, let's get more plants in the ground, not necessarily in an experimental fashion, because that takes, a different amount of resources than planting does. But we certainly will monitor, whether those efforts are being successful through some rapid monitoring. Also selecting the correct seed mixes and broadcast methods. By that, I mean planting, what is the best way to put seeds into the ground that they will be most successful. We'll continue our BioCrust experimentation. As you saw from Helen's presentation, there's some real implications for fire reduction there, and we want to really look at what those are. And we've been talking about doing some experimental red brome and Mediterranean grass removal, probably in small areas, and then seeding. The understanding is that it would be extremely difficult to do that in large areas, but we can start small and learn what we learn. We're going to continue with the Living Labs work. That is such a beautiful blend of science and education, and we hope to see that expand as our resources are able. And it is going to be all hands on deck with this planting and seeding. So all of those wonderful collaborations that we've formed internally are going to come into play. So with that, I want to say a huge thank you. I know this slide does not cover all of our partners, but I did my best to put in everyone that we've worked with this year, who's kind of front and center. I want to thank the Bob and Renee Parsons Foundation and the City of Scottsdale, Scottsdale Unified School District. I could go on and on, but I know we're really low on time. So thank you to all of our partners who make this possible. And most of all, thank you to our citizen scientists and stewards who make everything possible. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we will see you for next year's symposium. Bye.